Yes.
Juste une question de déroulement, Monsieur le Président a demandé.
Encore un peu. May I please ask to be seated? This is one of the only times I can order the Secretary General to sit. I lost the President. Okay. Yeah, they'll come down.
They are in meeting rooms. They are coming.
Yeah, they're coming. Okay, that's good. So I can see that my tie is done well, right? Is it okay, Anuna? Okay. Please be seated. President is coming. Bide with me for a second. We were looking for the President. Thank you, Mr. President. That's a good idea. I'm going to give you my phone too. Voila. (3:15). I propose, dear colleagues, dear friends, that we start with this high-level event on environment and human rights, the right to a safe, healthy and sustainable environment. I'm very pleased to welcome the President of Hungary, His Excellency János Áder. We had already a couple of meetings. We will have online the chair of the Italian Parliament. We will see when that flashes up. Of course, we have the pleasure of having our own Secretary General, Maria, as usual, with us. I'm very pleased to have you here. We will have also a statement, if you wish, by the Minister for the Environment and Climate of Portugal, who unfortunately had to desist at the very last second, but we were lucky enough to have his deputy, Eduardo Pinheiro, who will be with us online. We also have one of our judges to the European Court of Human Rights, Mr. Tim Eike, I hope I said that right, who is the environmental specialist, I've been told, in the Court of Human Rights. And of course, we've got Anuna de Wever, who is a climate and human rights activist, I see on my paper. But basically, she's an environmental activist, very well known across Europe, but specifically in Belgium, since she is a Belgian citizen. And there's no coincidence that she's a Belgian that I am. There's really no coincidence at all. Let me head off by thanking all of you for being with us. We will have some more colleagues of the Parliament coming in, but as you know, committees are going on, but as time goes by, they will join with us. We are very pleased to have all of you, and I think today is a very specific and great day. As you know, we have 7 different reports, resolutions, and recommendations on our agenda. We passed 4 of them. Now, all these 4, who basically are quite heavy as to the substance, were passed, dear colleagues, dear friends, unanimously, which of course is going to put a lot of pressure on the Committee of Ministers, but we like that. And of course, the judge of the Human Court knows that having passed this, it probably will be an issue that, to the extent of the possible, will be taken account when going forward in the case law of environment. A while ago, I was in New York with Antonio Guterres, I have to say. He, at that stage, promised to be with us. Due to some circumstances, we had to modify our agenda. Normally, it was foreseen for June, but then we had the violence against women issue on our agenda, because it was really timely to do so, the Istanbul Convention and other issues. And we placed the environmental debate today. This had as a consequence that since we have the big meeting in New York, that Mr. Guterres cannot personally be with us, but he absolutely wanted to deliver a message. And so I would like to start by having the message of Mr. Guterres right now.
Dear parliamentarian colleagues, it is a pleasure to join the Parliamentary Assembly for this year's timely debate on environment and human rights. Climate change, pollution, the rapid extinction of masses of species, the spread of zoonotic diseases, our planet is rapidly reaching a point of no return. Not only are we destroying the natural world around us, we are effectively destroying our ability to honor our rights as human beings. That's because every human right ultimately depends on a healthy biosphere. Without healthy functioning ecosystems, there will be no clean air to breathe, safe water to drink, or nutritious food to eat. The right to life, health, food, water, and culture are in jeopardy. Efforts to slow climate change have proven insufficient to stop the tidal wave of environmental destruction sweeping the planet. And once again, the most vulnerable populations are the worst affected. COVID-19 is a wake-up call. As a part of the natural world, human beings cannot and will not survive a drastic change in the environment. We must recognize that the human rights-based recovery from the pandemic and our planet's repair are two sides of the same coin. Upcoming COPs on climate change and biodiversity, as well as the Stockholm Plus 50 meeting, offer last-minute opportunities to really change course and redefine our relationship with nature. But only if we recognize the environment and human rights are inseparable can we turn this tide. Rights-based conservation is the most effective, efficient, and equitable path towards safeguarding the planet. Only if we move towards sustainable consumption and production patterns will we be able to achieve equity in access to and use of natural resources. We must urgently acknowledge the profound importance of implementing a rights-based approach to both the climate and biodiversity crisis. In this vein, I would urge the recognition of the right to a healthy environment. Together, let us build an inclusive world where people can enjoy the full respect of their human rights and live with dignity as living beings on a healthy planet. I wish you a fruitful discussion, and I thank you.
Thanks for this inspiring introduction. As you will have heard, dear colleagues, the Secretary General of the United Nations specifically said that human rights and environment are inseparable, and on top of that, that a rights-based approach is needed, including the right to a healthy environment, which is basically it's the same, partly the same that we have been saying and voting on this morning. Let me hand it to the next part. Just one small message of sanitary elements. I do appreciate every one of you wearing your masks. This is not an assembly meeting, it is like an event, so it's not that the same rules apply, but I do urge you to keep your masks on, please. Of course, when one of our speakers takes the podium, you are free to take off your masks at the podium, but please, going back to your seat and answering to the questions, I would ask you to put your mask on again. So let me now move to our first speaker, basically as a response a little bit to the other Secretary General. It's my pleasure to, of course, welcome Maria Pejcinovic-Buric, our own Secretary General. Protecting the right to a healthy environment requires action from all states, including all parts and entities at the Council of Europe. This assembly is an important, I would say, a major part of that, but the entire institution, the Council of Europe as a whole, is stronger when we work together, diligently trying to achieve our common goals. Therefore, we really highly appreciate, Madam Secretary General, your presence here today. And without any due delay, I yield the floor to you.
Monsieur le Président de la République de Hongrie, Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée parlementaire chérique, Mesdames et Messieurs, jamais auparavant le comportement de l'homme n'a représenté un tel danger pour son environnement. Jamais auparavant, nos connaissances et notre compréhension n'ont été aussi vastes et jamais notre conscience de la situation n'a été aussi vive. Jamais non plus il n'a été aussi urgent que chacun de nous agisse. Individus, entreprises, États ou organisations internationales, il est de notre responsabilité à tous de protéger notre planète et d'en prendre soin. Le rôle du Conseil de l'Europe à cet égard est clair. La Convention européenne des droits de l'homme et la Charte sociale européenne forment le socle des droits de l'homme sur notre continent. Elles s'appliquent à tous les aspects de notre vie. Alors, quand les dommages causés à notre environnement mettent en péril ces droits fondamentaux, nous intervenons. Car la Convention et la Charte ne sont, en fin de compte, pas figées dans le temps. Ce sont des instruments vivants qui doivent être interprétés à la lumière de notre époque et s'adapter aux nouveaux enjeux dans le domaine des droits de l'homme. Quand les dommages à l'environnement entraînent la négation du droit à la vie, au respect de la vie privée et des biens, quand ils portent atteinte au droit à la santé, à un environnement sain ou au logement, ou quand ceux qui agissent pour protéger l'environnement sont privés de leur droit à un procès équitable et de leur liberté d'expression, de réunion ou d'association. Alors, il est capital de réparer ces injustices. C'est pourquoi la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme et le Comité européen des droits sociaux ont développé tout un ensemble d'arrêts et de décisions établissant un lien entre droits de l'homme et la protection de l'environnement et précisant les mesures positives que les États européens doivent prendre. Bien sûr, c'est tout d'abord aux États membres qu'il incombe d'appliquer ces normes, nos normes communes. D'ailleurs, les juridictions nationales s'appuient déjà sur ces normes lorsqu'elles statuent sur des affaires relatives à l'environnement. Cette tendance ne fera que s'accélérer à mesure que la jurisprudence de Strasbourg se développera. But the Council of Europe will not simply leave them to it. Our job is to support member states in fulfilling their obligations. That's why we have updated our manual on human rights and the environment and launched online help courses on human rights and the environment. Presenting practitioners with the principles derived from the case law so that they can put these two into practice and raise the quality of life for millions. Of course, laying out the case law alone is simply not enough. We must go further, be proactive. We must use those same principles to set the detailed standards that will make the change required. That's why we are looking to update, revise, and maximize the impact of our existing treaties on environmental protection, including on environmental crimes, for example. But just as important, we have set to work a group of experts, which is preparing a new recommendation on human rights and the environment, and which will consider the case for new binding instruments too. Tools that will better prepare European governments for the task ahead. Dear friends, the Council of Europe has transformed the human rights landscape of our continent for over 7 decades now, applying our timeless principles to the evolving changes of the modern world. Failure to protect our environment will lead to irreversible consequences. So we will not shy from our task. This year, our World Forum for Democracy asks the questions, can democracy save the environment? And there, at this organization, we will play our part to ensure that it can. From the Committee of Ministers setting standards to our Development Bank funding mitigation and adaptation, to a parliamentary assembly that's pushing for progress at the multilateral level. This is about leadership, and the law, the will and the means. We have these tools at our disposal, so let us use them now to shape a better future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General. I heard you well because you mentioned at least 3 times binding rules. We love that because that's exactly what we are trying to propose to the Committee of Ministers to take on, heading into, if possible, a feasibility study and looking into how we can connect really environment to human rights. A while ago, I had the enormous honor to be in Rome and to have a conversation, if I may say so, with the Holy Father on environment. At that stage also, I invited him to come to Strasbourg on the item, and he basically told me if it is possible in any way, I will do so. Of course, physically or online. Although all of this was not really possible, I do have to say that I was very, very pleased to receive a personal letter by the Holy Father himself, signed in his name. He's got a very small signature on the bottom to the right, which calls for his modesty, I suppose. But it is really a true honor that we as an organization, and I myself as a president, after this conversation with the Holy Father, he really has digged into the issue of linking environment to human rights, as he has done before. And so please allow me to have a few quotes out of this long letter, which is available, and if you could keep it on the screen, please, of this long letter. It is a letter in Italian, but I will quote in English. Just a few quotes. First quote, each tangible initiative and decision by this organization, meaning us, each tangible initiative and decision by this organization that can improve our planet's alarming state of health must be supported and properly implemented. These are very strong words. Second quote, we cannot wait any longer. We must act. Any instrument that respects human rights and the principles of democracy and the rule of law, the fundamental values of the Council of Europe, can be useful in tackling this global challenge, meaning environment. Third quote, yet we can, when we talk only of rights, we only think about what is owed to us. We must also consider our responsibilities towards future generations and the world that we want to leave to our children and to today's young people. Third quote. Fourth quote, let us act with hope, courage and determination, and let us make concrete decisions. These decisions cannot be put off any longer if their aim is to protect our common home and the dignity of every human being. A very strong message from the Holy Father, straight into the heart of what we are doing, linking environment to human rights. And he, as well as the United Nations Secretary General, basically calls upon linking environment to human rights in a binding way. I just wanted to share this with you because I believe, given the outreach of the Pope into the world, it is important for you to know that this also has the support of them. Without any delay, and having shared some quotes with you, I would like to pass on to His Excellency, Mr. János Ader, President of the Republic of Hungary. Mr. President, we are extremely honored by your presence. We know that one of the key priorities of Hungary's presidency of the Committee of Ministers is the protection of environment. Your presence here today, Mr. President, is a testament to the importance that your country attaches to this issue. President Ader himself, dear colleagues, has shown leadership on environmental matters. Besides being among the first world leaders to sign the Paris Agreement into law, I repeat, being one of the first world leaders to sign the Paris Agreement into law, he has frequently spoken on the importance and urgency of taking action to address climate change and protect the environment, including at the United Nations. On top of that, President Ader founded the Blue Planet Foundation in 2016 with the aim of promoting environmental and sustainable development in Hungary and abroad. Mr. President, our Assembly counts on the Hungarian presidency and your personal commitment and dedication to the cause to move forward and take concrete actions to ensure that environment takes its deserved place in the system of human rights and is recognized as such. Excellency, I yield the floor.
Thank you very much. Élek a lehetőséggel, amit elnök úr felajánlott, és leveszem a maszkot. A másik lehetőség pedig, hogy anyanyelvemen fogok beszélni. Tisztelt elnök úr, tisztelt főtitkárasszony, tisztelt hölgyeim és uraim! Nézem az órát. Ezt megelőzően találkoztunk elnök úrral, és amikor azt mondtam neki, hogy az elmúlt években már meglehetősen sok előadást tartottam különböző korosztályok képviselőinek, és ez az előadás egyetlen egy alkalommal sem maradt 1 óra alatt, inkább a másfél órát haladta meg, akkor riadtan rám nézett, és azt mondta, hogy na, ettől tartottam. Nem fogok másfél órát beszélni természetesen. Az eddig idézett részben a Guterres főtitkár úrnak a szavai, részben főtitkárasszony által elmondottak, részben a pápai levélből vett idézetek. Hogyha egy mondatba foglalom össze ezeknek az üzenetét, a pápa levelében ez így is volt, cselekednünk kell. Ugye a Guterres főtitkár úr azt mondta, hogy az utolsó utáni lehetőségben vagyunk. Főtitkár azt mondta, hogy soha nem jelentettünk még ilyen veszélyt a környezetünkre, és Ferenc pápa pedig azt mondta, azt írta levelében, hogy cselekednünk kell. De mind a 3 üzenet lényegében ugyanazt jelenti. Klímaváltozás, vízválság, biodiverzitás hanyatlása, környezet és természetvédelem, egészséges környezethez való jog. Ezek a szavak hangzottak itt el az elmúlt percekben, és ezekkel a szavakkal találkozunk egyébként egyre gyakrabban a sajtóban is. A kérdés, amit az előttem szólók is feszegettek, megőrizhetjük-e olyannak teremtett világunkat, mint amilyennek ismerjük, vagy tönkretesszük azt. Ennek az esztendőnek a nagyobb része már eltelt, és az Európa Tanács tagállamai nem tartoznak a világ természeti csapásoktól leginkább sújtott országai közé. De hogyha csak visszatekintünk a mögöttünk hagyott nyárra, akkor azt láthatjuk, júniusban Csehországban egy olyan tornádó söpört végig 220 km/h sebességen, amire nem volt példa az ország történetében, sőt a régió történetében sem. Ugyanebben a hónapban korábbi rekordokat megdöntő áradásokat tapasztaltunk, Németországban, Belgiumban volt a legnagyobb pusztítás, és még ugyancsak a nyáron az oroszországi erdőtüzek is meghaladtak minden korábbi mértéket, hiszen egyetlen adat is jól mutatja ezt, a nyáron Portugália területének 2-szeresével megegyező terület vált a lángok martalékává Oroszországban néhány hét, illetve néhány hónap alatt. Néhányan mondhatják azt, hogy ez egy egyedi tendencia. Előfordulnak ilyen anomáliák. De hogyha megnézzük az elmúlt 50 év történéseit, akkor azt látjuk, hogy a természeti katasztrófák száma az 5-szörösére nőtt, és az anyagi kár, amit a természeti katasztrófák okoztak, az meg 7-szereződött. Természeti katasztrófák, pláne hogyha egymásra halmozódó természeti katasztrófák érnek egy térséget, egy országot, abból általában gazdasági krízis, a gazdasági krízisből szociális feszültség, a szociális feszültségből pedig gyakran politikai válság keletkezik, sem egyik, sem másik nem kedvez az emberi jogok kiteljesítésének. Klímaváltozás, erről beszélünk talán a legtöbbet. Lehet, hogy néhányan önök közül ott is voltak, a képeket bizonyára látták, föl tudják idézni magukban. 2015. decemberre Párizs, befejezzük a tárgyalást, újongó emberek, egymást ölelgető delegátusok, mindenki boldog. Elfogadtuk a párizsi megállapodást. Eltelt 6 esztendő, hamarosan 6 éve vagyunk ettől a pillanattól, és ma szomorúan mondhatjuk, hogy 6 év után távolabb vagyunk a párizsi céloktól, mint az elfogadás pillanatában voltunk. Az ENSZ kiadott szeptemberben, ebben a hónapban kiadott egy jelentést, ami azt tartalmazza, hogy ha a mostani tendencia folytatódik, akkor 2030-ra nemhogy alacsonyabb lesz a kibocsátásunk 1990-hez képest, hanem közel 60%-kal lesz magasabb 2030-ra. Azt láthatjuk, hogy a szavak és a tettek, az elvek és a valóság bizony köszönő viszonyban sincs egymással. Azt láthatjuk, hogy magukat klímabajnoknak minősítőekként reklámozó országok, jó néhány Európai Uniós ország is ezek közé tartozik, azok bizony nemhogy nem csökkentették a kibocsátásukat 1990-hez képest, hanem bizony növelték. És akkor nem szoktunk beszélni, hogy az egyfőre eső kibocsátások tekintetében melyik ország hogyan is áll tulajdonképpen Európában és az Európai Unióban. Második, vízválság. Erről is egyre több szó esik. A tudósok abban egyetértenek, hogy a klímaváltozás hatásainak a 80%-át a vízen keresztül, valamilyen vizes hatáson keresztül érezzük, és abban is egyetértés van, hogy az úgynevezett hidrológiai ciklus felborult, vagy legalábbis borulóban van, mindenképpen változik, ami pedig szélsőséges időjárási eredményekhez, szélsőséges időjáráshoz vezet. Lokális és regionális vízválságokat láthatunk most már, amik kilépnek ebből a lokális térből, és globális hatásúvá válnak, ellátási és működési gondokat eredményezhetnek a világ más részén is. Gondoljanak csak a néhány évvel ezelőtti indonéz árvizekre. Erdők. 2020 a fekete esztendeje volt a világ erdeinek, hiszen 42 000 négyzetkilométernyi erdőt vágtak ki. Ez Magyarország területének közel a fele. Biodiverzitás, biológiai sokszínűség. Azt mindannyian tudják, akik a teremben ülnek, hogy a Föld történetében 5 kihalási hullám volt már. Abban a tudósok most már megegyeznek, hogy a 6. kihalási hullám is elkezdődött. És ennek leginkább a kiváltó oka mindaz, amit mi teszünk. A kiváltó okai mi magunk vagyunk. Önsorsrontó gyakorlatot folytatunk, és a saját jövőnket, a saját életfeltételeinket veszélyeztetjük a mostani gyakorlatunkkal. Joggal kérdezhetik önök, nézem az órát, joggal kérdezhetik önök, jó, ezeket jó részt ismerjük, no de mit tesz Magyarország azért, hogy ezekben a kérdésekben példát mutasson, vagy valamilyen megoldást találjon, valamivel előrébb járjon, mint a többi ország. Nézzük a klímát. Magyarország elsőként ratifikálta az Európai Unió tagországai közül a párizsi klímamegállapodást. 1990-hez képest Magyarországon a kibocsátás, a szén-dioxid kibocsátás 32%-kal csökkent. Összehasonlításképpen csak emlékeztetem a néhány perccel ezelőtt elmondottakra, hogy jó néhány Európai Uniós tagország kibocsátása nemhogy nem csökkent, hanem jelentősen nőtt. Tehát a miénk 32%-kal csökkent. A magyar parlament elfogadott egy törvényt, amiben rögzítette, hogy 2050-re Magyarország klímasemleges lesz, és a törvény után végrehajtási rendelkezések is következtek, aminek a következtében, mondok néhány példát, döntés van arról, hogy a szén energetikai célú felhasználása megszűnik Magyarországon rövid időn belül, döntés született arról, hogy folytatjuk azt a gyakorlatot, ami az elmúlt 5 évben volt jellemző Magyarországra, hogy minden esztendőben megdupláztuk az a naperőművi kapacitásunkat, ezt folytatjuk a következő esztendőkben is, és 2030-ra Magyarországon lecseréljük, pontosabban 2030-tól csak olyan buszokat állítunk forgalomba, amelyek elektromos meghajtásúak, 2030-tól Magyarországon dízel vagy benzines meghajtású buszokat a városi tömegközlekedésben nem fognak látni. A döntések következménye az lesz, a számításaink szerint, hogy 2030-ra, nem 2050-re, 2030-ra a magyarországi áramtermelés 90%-a szén-dioxidmentes lesz. Víz. Gyakran beszélünk a sok víz, a kevés víz és a szennyezett víz drámájáról. Mi mindegyiket érezzük egyébként, mindegyikből kaptunk ízelítőt az elmúlt években is. A sok víz drámája, tehát az időnként, esetleg csak 10 évenként érkező hatalmas árvizek, azt jelentik, arra kényszerítenek bennünket, hogy szükségtározókat építsünk, nagyon sok pénzünk megy erre, és lehet, hogy csak 10 évenként használjuk őket, de ahhoz, hogy a folyó mentén élőket megvédjük, erre szükségünk van. Ezzel párhuzamosan az ország középső része a klímaváltozás hatására elkezdett elsivatagosodni. Tehát ott meg kell oldani az elsivatagosodásnak a problémáját. És miután nagyon sok folyóinknak a 90%-a külföldről érkezik, nagyon sok szennyezést kapunk a szomszédos országokból, meg kell oldani vizeinknek a tisztítását. Büszkén mondhatom önöknek, hogy a magyarországi folyók tisztább állapotban hagyják el Magyarországot, mint ahogy hozzánk érkeztek. Erdő és erdőtelepítés. Az imént azt mondtam önöknek, hogy a világ erdei világon 42 000 négyzetkilométernyi erdőt vágtak ki. Ehhez képest Magyarországon az elmúlt 100 esztendőben közel megdupláztuk az erdőterületeknek a nagyságát, további erdősítést tervezünk egyébként a következő esztendőkben. Biodiverzitás, egyetlen dologot, és ez egy jó hír, nem olyan régen adtuk át a Mura-Dráva-Duna bioszféra rezervátumot, ami 5 ország részvételével valósult meg. Magyarországon kívül a szomszédok Ausztria, Szlovénia, Szerbia és Horvátország vett részt ennek a biorezervátumnak a megépítésében és létrehozásában. 1 millió hektárnyi területen lényegében hoztuk létre ezt a bioszféra rezervátumot, amit egyébként, hát lehetett talán kicsit szerintelenül Európa Amazonaszának is hívnak. Végezetül. Szeretnék néhány kérdést, egészen pontosan 6 kérdést föltenni önöknek a további gondolkodás elősegítése szempontjából. A kérdések címzettjei részben önök, részben pedig minden politikai döntéshozó. Az első. Mikor vesszük végre komolyan saját magunkat? Miért nem tartjuk be korábbi közös döntéseinket? Egyre utaltam, Párizsi megállapodás. Távolabb vagyunk tőle, mint az elfogadás pillanatában. Második. Mikor látjuk be, hogy a víz az egyik legfontosabb gazdasági erőforrásunk? Megfelelő mennyiségű, minőségű víz nélkül sem a lakosság ellátása, sem a modern ipar, sem korszerű mezőgazdaság nem képzelhető el. Harmadik. Meddig nézzük tétlenül erdeink fogyását? Fogyasztási szokásainkkal, az általunk fenntartott kereslettel mennyiben vagyunk felelősek ezért? Negyedik. A természet által nyújtott szolgáltatásokat mikor árazzuk be? Mikor vesszük észre, hogy a biológiai sokféleség hanyatlása alapvetően a mi életesélyeinket csökkenti? Ötödik. Mikor változtatjuk meg közgazdasági gondolkodásunkat, és egy-egy beruházás kapcsán mikor számítjuk be a költségek közé az úgynevezett externáliákat, a levegő, a víz, a talaj elszennyezését? Hatodik, mikor látjuk be végre, hogy a megelőzés olcsóbb, mint a következmények kezelése, a károk elhárítása? És mikor alakítjuk át szabályainkat, támogatási rendszerünket ennek megfelelően? Az elején a pápára hivatkozva azt a kérdést tettem föl, hogy megőrizzük-e olyannak teremtett világunkat, amilyennek ismerjük, vagy tönkretesszük azt. Felismerhetnénk végre, hogy a kérdés alapvetően nem arról szól, hogy a természet milyen állapotba kerül. A természet majd alkalmazkodik, regenerálódik. A kérdés alapvetően nem a természetről szól, hanem rólunk. a mi jövőnkről. Köszönöm a figyelmüket.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your inspiring words. And I know that all of your questions, and we will address them not necessarily today, but we do have to address them. Specifically, the last one that you put, set aside from water, because water is the basis of all life, by the way, is when are we indeed going to realize that basically to prevent is cheaper than to repair damage? I think that's a very fundamental question. Thank you for your inspiring words. Dear colleagues, let us now go to our next speaker joining us via video. I hope that we have the Speaker of the Italian Chamber of Deputies, Mr. Roberto Fico, online. I am looking at my screen, whether that will work. Hopefully it does, otherwise we will have to skip and go to the next one. Voilà. Well, I don't see Mr. Fico. Anyway, Speaker Fico, voilà, welcome, dear colleague and good friend. We have met already a number of times. I'm very happy that you accepted to be on board, be it through video. We would have loved to have you here. You know, I have pushed you so hard to get here, but for whatever reason it was impossible. Dear colleague, Speaker Fico was elected Speaker of the Italian Parliament back in 2018, and since then has shown leadership for both international cooperation and the environment. In a joint statement with his fellow speakers from the G7 countries in September of 2020, last year, he rightly reminded us that the climate crisis is the existential threat of our time, jeopardizing the health and well-being of every family in every community around the world. The statement, dear colleague, urged all of us to take action and do what we really promised, to respect and implement not only the Paris Agreement, but to take action in parliaments, which we, by the way, have done this morning and will continue to do this afternoon. With any due delay, dear colleague, dear Roberto, you have the floor.
Buongiorno, buon pomeriggio a tutti e a tutte. Saluto il Presidente Dems che, come sa, avrei voluto tanto partecipare ed essere in presenza lì oggi, ma purtroppo davvero sono dovuto rimanere in Italia. Sarà per un'altra volta, ma intanto sono contento di essere qua in video e poter essere con voi. E saluto il Presidente Ader e tutti gli altri partecipanti. Sono lieto di partecipare all'incontro odierno che si inserisce in un'ambiziosa iniziativa dell'Assemblea parlamentare del Consiglio d'Europa. Condivido molto questo approccio integrale al tema che mette insieme ambiente, democrazia e Stato di diritto e condivido il vostro obiettivo di contribuire all'adozione di regole giuridiche in materia a livello internazionale. Questo punto è senza dubbio fondamentale. La tutela dell'ambiente non significa soltanto preservare flora, fauna e risorse naturali, ma è un presupposto per godere pienamente di altri diritti. Questo è un approccio ormai consolidato a livello internazionale e seguito in diverse costituzioni nazionali. Nel nostro Paese è in queste settimane all'esame della Camera un disegno di legge già approvato in prima lettura dal Senato della Repubblica che introduce espressamente nella Costituzione tra i principi fondamentali della Repubblica la tutela dell'ambiente, della biodiversità e degli ecosistemi, anche nell'interesse proprio delle future generazioni. E stabilisce che l'iniziativa economica privata non può svolgersi in modo tale da recare danno alla salute ambientale e all'ambiente. Sempre in Italia abbiamo recentemente istituiti per la prima volta un Ministero per la transizione ecologica e presso la Presidenza del Consiglio un Comitato interministeriale per la transizione ecologica, che ha il compito di assicurare il coordinamento di tutte le politiche nazionali per la transizione ecologica. L'iniziativa dell'Assemblea parlamentare del Consiglio d'Europa completerebbe questo quadro giuridico e politico multilivello, contribuendo ad affermare ulteriormente che la protezione dell'ambiente deve essere una dimensione trasversale a tutte le politiche pubbliche. Da essa passano infatti la prevenzione delle catastrofi climatiche e dei loro costi economici e sociali. la tutela della salute delle persone, la qualità dell'agricoltura e del cibo che mangiamo, il diritto all'acqua potabile e ai servizi igienico-sanitari. L'Unione Europea ha fissato obiettivi ambiziosi in questa direzione. L'iniziativa Next Generation EU vincola gli Stati membri ad assegnare alla transizione verde almeno il 37% degli stanziamenti totali che l'Italia nel suo piano ha portato al 40%. Tali strumenti tuttavia saranno insufficienti se non accompagnati da un rinnovato impegno politico e dalla capacità di coinvolgere pienamente i cittadini nelle scelte che poi ne conseguono. Ancora in questi giorni, dinanzi ai rincari delle bollette energetiche, c'è chi punta il dito contro la transizione ecologica. Non possiamo far passare questo messaggio. Certo, è chiaro che la transizione ecologica avrà costi di adattamento per il sistema produttivo, determinando in alcuni settori temporanei svantaggi competitivi rispetto a imprese straniere che seguono standard ambientali, sociali ed energetici meno rigorosi. Ma sono costi modesti, modestissimi, rispetto ai benefici a medio e a lungo termine, per la collettività e per lo stesso sistema produttivo. La riduzione della bolletta energetica, l'eliminazione dei gravi problemi allo smaltimento dei rifiuti indifferenziati connessi, lo sviluppo di tecnologie innovative, di investimenti verdi e di nuovi lavori di qualità. Dobbiamo spiegare di più ai cittadini le molteplici implicazioni di un ambiente sicuro e sano e di un approccio integrale, invitandoli a modificare in modo responsabile i propri stili di vita, i comportamenti quotidiani. E dobbiamo rafforzare il coordinamento a livello multilaterale. A questo proposito, l'Italia è impegnata in questi mesi in due importanti sedi. La prima è la presidenza del G20, incentrata intorno al rilancio di una crescita verde e sostenibile a beneficio di tutti, e quindi a tre pilastri: People, Planet, Prosperity. La seconda è la conferenza delle parti sul cambiamento climatico, la cosiddetta COP26, che l'Italia sta organizzando insieme al Regno Unito. In questa cornice il Parlamento italiano ospiterà gli appositi incontri dal 7 al 9 ottobre prossimo, d'intesa con la UIP e il Parlamento britannico. Alla Camera in particolare ospiteremo un incontro in preparazione della COP26. L'incontro sarà occasione per una discussione sull'azione per combattere il cambiamento climatico a livello nazionale, regionale e internazionale. Al termine verrà adottata una proposta di documento finale da finalizzare poi nella successiva riunione di Glasgow. Confido che attraverso occasioni di dibattito come quella odierna e come la riunione di Roma daremo il nostro contributo ad affrontare le sfide ambientali e a definire un percorso per garantire un benessere durevole ed equo alle prossime generazioni. Vi ringrazio.
Thank you, my dear Kilo, good friend, dear colleague, good friend Roberto. I mean, when we listen to you, I come also to the question of the President of Hungary. You are acting, but we need to act more. And you justly mentioned that you will introduce environment apparently in the Constitution of Italy. Well, that is a very promising element, because that allows probably people, your citizens, to go to your constitutional court, and if that doesn't specify, and if the Committee of Ministers, dear Ambassador of Hungary, gets to a feasibility study and binding rules, eventually even to the European Court of Human Rights. Maybe we will meet in Glasgow. You mentioned the COP26. I would like to make one remark to that extent, and it goes into what President Arden said. I always ask myself, this is the seventh question, Mr. President, how come that so many people make so much effort, meeting now for the 26th time after 30 years, and the environment is still going the wrong way? It's a very simple question. And so this is the seventh one in the row, if you wish, and this is exactly how, with your permission, and certainly with the support of this Assembly today, that I will take as a message to COP26. I now come to the representative of the Portuguese Minister for Environment and Climate Action. Unfortunately, the minister is called away at the very last second. This happens when you're a minister. I mean, a lot amongst us have been there, so know that. But we have the pleasure of having the Deputy Minister, Eduardo Pinheiro, whom I gladly give the floor right now. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon for all of you. Your Excellency, the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, distinguished representatives, Excellencies. First of all, as a representative of the Portuguese government, I would like to welcome the reports that were approved in the previous session. It is an important step, and it is with greatest honor that I address this House on per excellence of human rights. The right to a clean and healthy environment was left out of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights because it was drafted before the modern environmental movements in the 60s and in the 70s. However, over recent years, there has been a growing interest and movement at national, regional, international levels to go further on this understanding. Portugal was the first country in the world to include in its constitution the right to a human, healthy, and ecologically balanced living environment. As you know, the legal recognition of the right to a healthy environment has been expanding for decades, with over 100 countries having incorporated it in their constitutions, and many more having recognized it through national laws or regional agreements. Nowadays, more than 3/4 of countries around the world recognize the right to a healthy environment. We reached the stage where, through science and technology, we have acquired the power to transform our environment in countless ways and on an unprecedented scale. All around the globe, there is growing evidence of human-caused harm, such as water, air and land pollution, the destruction and depletion of natural resources, biodiversity, loss, and climate change, just to name a few. Thus, it is important to recognize our dependence of the Earth's natural resources. Natural resources such as air, water, and land are fundamental to life. And so it is our climate. Much more than economic assets and infrastructure, they are the basis of our survival. With more than 1.7 million children under the age of life losing their lives every year as a consequence of avoidable environmental impacts, and millions more suffering diseases, disability, and an array of other harms, all of which link to exposure to unsafe environments. We should understand that environmental and climate crises are also child rights crises. People all over the world seek inspiration, knowledge, and spirituality within their natural surroundings, and that was even more relevant in these pandemic times. And climate change is affecting every country on every continent. It is disrupting national economies and affecting lives. Weather patterns are changing, sea levels are rising, and weather events are becoming more frequent and extreme. Destruction of environment and thereby of the natural resources is therefore a violation or leads to the violation of human rights, directly by undermining the above aspects of human existence and or indirectly by leading to other violations of human rights. For example, through social disruption, conflicts to maintain or reach natural resources, or even war. At the same time, millions of species of plants, animals, and microorganisms share the Earth with us, and each has a value of its own, a role to play in this wide, complex web of interdependent connections. And we all are interconnected, so they are also affected. Biodiversity has numerous uses in agriculture, medicine, food, and industry. Its loss is therefore a part of the destruction of environmental human rights. In fact, access to safe drinking water, clean air, and soil benefits, abundant biodiversity are essential, fundamental, and universal human rights because they determine people's survival and are therefore a condition for the exercise of the other human rights. Mr. President, Excellencies, the environment is a collective good, the heritage of all mankind and the responsibility of us all. We are all connected in an environment that has no borders, and it pushes us towards a new concept of nation, which transcends geography in a new understanding that we are one single humanity in a planet that is unique. The time for change is getting shorter and shorter. We need to urgently act against climate change and biodiversity loss. Europe is leading the way. The European Green Deal, the new growth strategy for Europe, provides the framework for a sustainable recovery in line with the objective of making Europe the first carbon neutral continent. The European climate law sets a clear framework for climate action and ambition in the EU, in line with the Paris Agreement. Furthermore, with the so-called Fit for 55 package, Europe will show how to reach those targets. The recently adopted European strategies on climate neutrality, adaptation to climate change, circular economy, hydrogen, biodiversity, chemicals and food systems, for instance, are a clear testimony of the EU determination to move from words to action. And Portugal was the first country in the world to commit to carbon neutrality as a contribution to the goals of the Paris Agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you one thing, there will be no human rights on that planet. In this worldwide context, international instruments such as international conventions and protocols on environment and fundamental key pieces on this chessboard and very significant to protect human rights. That's why we strongly support multilateralism that unites us and does not divide us. In the coming months, crucial decisions will be taken at the fifth conference of the parties of the Convention of Biological Diversity and at COP26 of the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change. In Portugal is prepared to contribute to ambitious outcomes. Combat climate change and biodiversity loss are currently recognized as a moral, ethical, and economic imperatives. Climate change is a precursor of a set of disruptions in the environment, the economy, and society that mainly affect the most vulnerable populations, and is a factor that promotes poverty and induces migration. Human rights are about respecting the human being, both as an individual and as a member of the human species, and ensuring the dignity of the human being. Human rights are the real touchstone for the evolution of a society that is evolved and structured in humanity and respect for each other. We urge for the universal recognition of the right to a healthy environment, to clean air, drinking water, healthy food, clean oceans, a stable climate, and to biodiversity and healthy ecosystems. We firmly believe that such a recognition would have real-world practical value, both in terms of better protecting and promoting individual human rights, and by protecting and preserving our unique natural environment. Thank you for your attention.
As we all know, Portugal, as being a leader, as Hungary has been and still is on this issue, having environment in your constitution, the Deputy Minister, and also fighting together with us for that human rights, environment get linked, because environment is a universal right. What sense has the Article 2 of the Convention, which says the right to life, what sense does it make if you cannot enjoy that right of life in a clean, safe, healthy and sustainable environment? Which brings me to Judge Timeki from the European Court of Human Rights. These are the ones that everyone should be afraid of at the end of the day. I hope that you will scare everyone now. Judge Ake has been serving at the European Court of Human Rights as the judge in respect of the UK since 2016. As a prominent scholar and lawyer in human rights, European and international law, Judge Ake has been at the forefront in the discussions on how the European Convention on Human Rights might be used, or what are the limitations to using the Convention to address environmental matters. Of course, this is yesterday, because maybe tomorrow the right to a safe, clean, healthy, sustainable environment might be inscribed, who knows, in the Convention itself. Without any due delay, we are extremely interesting to hear you. Mr. Eke, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear President Dames, dear Mr. President, dear Madam Secretary General, dear Mr. Weaver, dear representatives. Thank you very much for your kind invitation for me to participate in today's high-level event. It's an honor for me to be able to contribute to the important debate concerning environment and human rights which you are having today. President Spano regrets he cannot be here today, but judicial commitments required his presence across the river. The pressing issue of human rights and the environment have been put at the top of the agenda again by the Parliamentary Assembly, as well as the three recent presidencies of the Committee of Ministers. And we, as the Court, are grateful that we're being invited to participate, at least as far as our judicial role permits us, to take part in this important Council of Europe-wide debate. After all, over the almost 30 years, the Court has, in its case law, consistently recognised the increasing importance of the protection of the environment and its importance and its interrelationship with the enjoyment of human rights. And that even though, as is well known and is of course part of your debate today, neither the Convention nor any of its protocols currently expressly provide for a right to a healthy environment. This recognition of the importance of the environment and its interrelationship with the enjoyment of human rights is now reflected in more than 350 judgments and decisions in which the Court has adjudicated on questions involving the relationship between the environment and the protection of the environment and the rights protected under the Convention, and in particular the rights to life, the right to private and family life, the right to access to court, to freedom of information, and to the peaceful enjoyment of property. It has been able to do so in relying and applying its long-established living instrument doctrine, as well as its recognition that the Convention cannot be interpreted in a vacuum, but must be interpreted in harmony with other relevant rules of international law, of which it forms part, as well as soft law standards developed by the Council of Europe, including the Parliamentary Assembly and the Committee of Ministers. As a consequence, the Court's case law now provides a degree of substantive protection, primarily where environmental disasters or accidents have caused or threatened to cause loss, as well as it now provides substantial procedural protection. Under the latter, it is now a primary requirement under the Convention that Member States put in place an appropriate legislative and administrative framework, including regulations, to compel institutions, whether private or public, to adopt appropriate measures for the protection of people's lives. Furthermore, as the Court underlined in its judgment in Tashkent against Turkey, where a state must determine complex issues of environmental and economic policy, the decision-making process is subject to three procedural requirements. One, it must involve appropriate investigations and studies in order to allow the decision-maker to predict and evaluate in advance the effects of those activities which might damage the environment and infringe individual rights, and to enable them to strike a fair balance between the various conflicting interests at stake. Second, there must be public access to the conclusions of such studies and to information which would enable members of the public to assess the danger to which they're being exposed. And thirdly, individuals concerned must be able to appeal to the courts against any decision, act or omission where they consider that their interests or their comments have not been given sufficient weight in the decision-making process. That said, of course, there is no denying that there are limits to the protection the Court has been able to provide to date. These limits are derived primarily from its focus, inherent in the Convention, on the protection of the Convention rights of individual victims from the acts or omissions of the respective respondent state in any case before it. A focus which requires the identification of a sufficiently direct link expressed as the need for a serious, specific and imminent risk between an applicant and the harm arising from the alleged violation. As a court of law, the court therefore needs to be satisfied not only that the individual applicant is such a victim, but also that there is a sufficiently established causal link between the act or omission of the respondent state in question and the victim's injury. Furthermore, there is, of course, the mandatory requirement that applicants should have exhausted domestic remedies before they can bring their applications before the court, as well as, of course, the requirement of subsidiarity, long recognized by the court, but now expressly incorporated into the preamble of the Convention by Protocol number 15. Now, as you are aware, some of these limitations are now being tested by an increasing number of climate change applications brought before the court. The most well-known of which are probably the application brought by 6 Portuguese children and young adults against 33 member states, and the application of the Climate Seniors Association against Switzerland. Now, while these applications are frequently described as having been accepted by the court, I should make clear at this point that while they have been communicated to the respective respondent governments, both the admissibility and, if admissible, the merits of these applications are yet to be decided. You will therefore, I hope, understand that I, as a sitting judge of the court, will be able to say little more about these cases today. But we are, of course, not alone in engaging with this challenge, and the Secretary-General referred to this. And in addition to other international developments, we follow closely and with particular interest the decisions of our colleagues at the national courts when they are confronted with these issues. The dialogue between the national courts and the Strasbourg Court is an essential tool in our collective engagement with the challenges posed by environmental degradation and climate change. Now, I might not have been able to deliver the scary message, but let me close by reiterating that while ultimately our role under Article 19 of the Convention is to ensure the observance of the engagements undertaken by the high contracting parties on the Convention, under the Convention and the protocols thereto, it is not for the court or for me to express a view on the desirability or feasibility of a further protocol to the Convention, expressly bringing environmental protection within its competence. But I want to assure you all that, as President Spahn has previously said, whatever the answer to this essentially political question, the court will continue to play its role within the boundaries of its competences as a court of law, forever mindful that the Convention guarantees must be effective and real and not illusory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Those who listened very well should be, nevertheless, dear judge, a little bit scared. And I'll come back to that in the second part. But let me now come to Anuna de Wever van der Heijden. Warm welcome, Anuna, amongst us. I'm very glad that you're here. As parliamentarians, our job is to be representatives of the people. That's what we're supposed to be. But to be fair, we need to be reminded once in a while of who it is that we are representing. Now, Anuna de Wever, dear colleagues, is one of the leading activists around the world who, starting back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, gathered thousands of people to protest in favor of the environment, because to protest seems negative, but it is in favor of the environment. And she, Anuna and all other people, reminded us that lawmakers and citizens, we have to really take the climate urgently on board. And as the President and so many other people have said, we have to take action. Well, we are extremely interested in what you as a young activist has to tell us. Anuna, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Distinguished members of the Parliamentary Assembly and fellow panelists, I am here today as a voice of the generation that will live with the consequences of the decisions you are making here today. In these resolutions, you talk about democracy, migration, rule of law, and the need for enhanced action by the Council of Europe. Many of the priorities highlighted in the resolutions are extremely important, and I want to applaud that. You are right in promoting a shift in international and national law, as well as government policies to ensure that a healthy environment is recognized as a basic human right. You are right in the notion that we need more participatory democracy and to respect the rule of law in order to combat the climate crisis. And you are right in the fact that if we want to protect human rights, we cannot turn away from the reality that millions will be forced to forcefully migrate and flee due to the climate crisis. It's an important first step to recognize problems and highlight solutions, and we can see that here today. But the part where you show true courage as a leader of this world comes with the implementation of those promises. When we see that many of the crucial scientific feedback loops, carbon budgets, and tipping points are not taken into account in your policies, and you only set targets decades from now, while the climate crisis is happening today, and there's many people on, for example, island states who don't even have until 2025, it's really hard for us young people to take your promises and beautiful words seriously, because the policies supporting them are not consistent. We understand that changing this system is not easy, because it's not just about fossil fuels. It's about human rights, about reinventing our economic system, and about respecting planetary boundaries. And because of decades of policies that have been destroying the ecosystems, keeping us alive, we are extremely late. And that is exactly why every hesitation or inaction to combat this crisis as a crisis is purely criminal, because it is people who pay for that with their lives. The new IPCC report clearly underlines the fact that any delay in the implementation of measures makes the most ambitious, meaning the only equal and livable scenarios, purely hypothetical. I think if we would all be a bit more straightforward and honest, we would be much further than where we are now. And as the next generation, I am not afraid to confront you with the truth, because I have nothing to lose. Everybody in this room knows that behind these doors there are other deals, policies, and resolutions being agreed upon that are completely contradicting the ambition laid out here today. If we really want to build a different world, we cannot just do it as a part-time job. We cannot preach about the climate crisis and then put 2030 and 2050 targets that will lead us to a world of 3 to 4 degrees rise, a world nobody can live in. We cannot put millions of euros in renewable energies while pouring billions into fossil fuels, expecting our emissions to go down. And we cannot build walls to keep climate and other refugees out and at the same time preach about human rights protections for mass displacement of people affected by the climate crisis. It's all about consistency, and your responsibility doesn't end by presenting resolutions. It's where the real work begins. While we sit here today, millions around the world are already suffering from the consequences of climate change. A report published this month by the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies shows that since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, climate-related disasters have affected over 130 million people worldwide. 600 million have been exposed to extreme temperatures. The numbers are simply terrifying. And these are consequences of real policies adopted by real politicians, such as many of you in this very room. I would like to echo indigenous activist Nemonte Nemkimo, who said, "This is my message to the Western world. Your civilization is killing life on Earth. Our way of disrespecting planetary boundaries by exploiting people for decades is killing life on Earth. What we are talking about is historic responsibility, a global challenge which humankind must face up to. Real leadership is about having the courage to put truth and care before profit and growth. It's about listening to the science and the facts, and to act accordingly. It's about stepping away from cowardly shortcuts towards a new sustainable world." Standing here in front of you today, appealing for a right for a future, was not how I dreamt of spending my youth. Your actions have, however, denied me of my freedom to live without fear. I never had a choice but to be brave. Everyone in this room has a responsibility to do anything in their power to change this system. Everything about it, the pillars it stands on, and the narratives that keep it going. And you have heard this many times, but we are running out of time. It is only these brief moments that I get to have the chance to stand in front of you and tell you how terrifying it is, how angry I am, and how we will not settle or compromise for anything else than a total system change. It's in these brief moments that I hope you don't just look at me as yet another climate activist with yet another speech, but as someone who is human, just like you, but brave enough to dream of a different world. As we are weeks away from COP26, this bold initiative by the Council has potential to show real, conscious climate leadership, which we desperately need. And as this has too often happened in the past, let's make sure that this time it doesn't stick to words. Therefore, I call on the Committee of Ministers to show courage and to do the right thing by making these resolutions a reality. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anuna, for that message. It is shaking us a little bit to our feet, which is needed, and I think that we share that kind of a combat, if we may say. But the last sentence was, as far as I'm concerned, extremely important also, and of course the other ones before, is that you really understand that what we try to do from the Assembly side with resolutions, but specifically with recommendations who have been accepted unanimously, and you support that question, that demand, that the Committee of Ministers who have the duty to take a recommendation on board, you and I hope that we can get into a next step and get environment linked to human rights, in whatever way, but in a binding way. So thank you for that. Dear colleagues, let us now go for the next 20 minutes. We're a little bit over time, but I'm looking at the Secretary General. We can go a little bit more. Nice. So let's now go to our next phase, where we've got the leaders of the political groups, or the representatives of the political groups, who make a reflection. And then I will do my best, dear panelists, to direct one of their or more of their reflections to you. So don't be surprised. I mean, we had this exercise another time, so I don't know whether I'm good at it, but still, I'll try. But let me head off by giving the floor to Céline Sayek-Beuquet on behalf of the Socialist Group. And may I ask, dear colleagues, groups leaders, to be brief enough in order to have as many people as possible being able to take the floor and address our panelists. Céline.
By all means, I salute everybody on behalf of the Socialists, Democrats and Greens group. And it's very heartening to hear a consensus that we all strongly believe that we need intervention to avert a climate crisis, and we need it now. And clearly, such an intervention has to be holistic, and we've already discussed many of the items that it should include. But I'd like to underline, first, we need to change the structure of our world economy. We need to, second, ensure that the structural transition is fair, it's just, it's equitable, and it doesn't feed in further into the existing socioeconomic inequalities. And finally, that indeed we have a rights-based framework to ensure the legal protections. And indeed, it was this holistic approach that was approved within this very chamber this morning. So I strongly underline that it was done unanimously. Now, this is very critical, and I refer to especially two of the recommendations that this plenary, this very plenary in this very chamber, actually recommends to the Committee of Ministers. It says, we'd like them to draw up an additional protocol to the European Convention on Human Rights and draw up an additional protocol to the European Social Charter to ensure that there is clear responsibility given to states to maintain a good state of the environment and to take into account equality. Therefore, I'd like to ask the panel, in their very own capacities, given this very unanimously strong mandate that was agreed on this morning, what concrete steps would they be willing and ready to take, especially in regard to these additional protocols, in the coming few months, not too far away, since we don't have much time left? And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Céline. We now go to Alex Poitchev for EPP.
Président, chers collègues, permettez-moi tout d'abord au nom du groupe PPE, de me féliciter que notre Assemblée a fait du droit à l'environnement sain un axe essentiel de ses travaux. Avec ce panel de haut niveau, et pas moins de 7 rapports thématiques, dont un projet de protocole additionnel à la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme. Je remercie le président de notre Assemblée pour son implication personnelle pour faire de ce sujet une priorité, et je félicite les différents rapporteurs pour la qualité de leurs travaux ainsi que les membres de ce panel, particulièrement le président de la Hongrie pour leurs interventions. Mais aussi, je voudrais faire une observation, Président. Inviter les juges, c'est vraiment le signe de détermination pour aboutir au but. Mais après l'accusation que nous avons entendue d'Hanouna, je vois aussi une autre explication pour sa présence. Comme vous le savez, le droit de l'environnement a été reconnu assez tardivement comme un bien commun au niveau international à partir des années 70, mais il revêt aujourd'hui une importance cruciale. Face aux conséquences dramatiques du changement climatique, il est indispensable de reconnaître le droit à l'environnement comme un principe fondamental et de renforcer les instruments juridiques garantissant sa protection au niveau international. Il va de notre responsabilité, comme c'est dit aujourd'hui, à l'égard des générations actuelles et futures, et il faut bouger. Comme disait l'ancien président de la République française Jacques Chirac, dans un environnement qui change, il n'y a pas de plus grand risque que de rester immobile. Je suis convaincu qu'il nous faut élaborer ensemble une véritable stratégie au niveau pan-européen. Vous pouvez compter, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, à soutien et la collaboration de notre groupe politique. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, cher Alexandre. Nous passons maintenant la parole au collègue Jacques Maire, le président du groupe ALDE.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'est une fierté aujourd'hui pour nous, le groupe ALDE, d'être avec vous, car c'est pratiquement 2 ans d'efforts pour monter en puissance ce travail important. Les messages qui sont adressés aujourd'hui par le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, par vous, El Nokour, par le pape, par la Cour, par les ministres, par la secrétaire générale, montrent quand même qu'il y a un moment où il faut passer aux actes. Ici, nous sommes au Conseil de l'Europe, nous ne sommes pas à l'OCDE, nous ne sommes pas dans nos États. L'acte, c'est vraiment de travailler et de faire ce sur quoi nous sommes légitimes. Si aujourd'hui, il y avait la conférence de La Haye avec Konrad Adenauer, Winston Churchill, François Mitterrand, évidemment, le droit à l'environnement serait inscrit dans la Convention. Si la même chose se passait en 1990, au moment de la Charte sociale, évidemment, l'environnement serait inscrit dans la Charte sociale. Donc qu'attendons-nous? Il y a bien sûr quelques difficultés aussi ou là. Il y a bien sûr, je dirais, la lourdeur aujourd'hui du multilatéralisme. Il y a bien sûr les freins de quelques États. Mais nous sommes une génération politique charnière. Celle pour laquelle nos enfants, nos grands-enfants, nos petits-enfants diront dans quelques années « Grand-père, papa, tu étais là, tu étais en responsabilité. Tu vois où on en est maintenant, qu'est-ce que tu as fait ?» Tout le monde sait parfaitement que nous ne sommes pas dans les 2 degrés. Nous ne sommes pas dans les 1,5 degré. Tout le monde le sait. Donc il faut que chacun se mobilise. Ici, au Conseil de l'Europe, ce qui a été fait par les 7 rapports montre les voies de la mobilisation. Et parmi ceux-ci, effectivement, le plus important, ce sont les conventions additionnelles. Ce n'est pas un tabou, ce n'est pas non plus un objet magique, ce sont des objets qu'il faut étudier. Nous avons fait, je crois, le maximum au niveau de l'Assemblée parlementaire. Ces 7 rapports qui rassemblent l'ensemble des groupes politiques ont été puissamment votés et le seront tout à l'heure. Je pense que le moment est venu d'agir et je remercie Hanouna pour ce qui n'est pas une culpabilisation mais qui est simplement un rappel à nos responsabilités. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci, cher Jacques. Nous passons maintenant à Nemeth Jolt. Nemeth Jolt, where is Jolt? Yeah, you have the word. You have the floor, Nemeth.
First of all, President, I would like to congratulate you for organizing this panel for the second time, and I think we have got now a new model which gives great visibility to a certain matter, and obviously to the Council of Europe as well. But also we have the substance, because in the morning we have been able to accept unanimously very important reports which have been referred to. I would like to ask you, President Ader, you are not only a green expert, but also a Christian politician. Less than 2 weeks ago, you have received Pope Francis in Budapest on the occasion of the International Eucharistic Congress. And we all know that Francis Pope was the author of the Laudato Si encyclical on climate and environmental protection. How do you see personally the relationship between environment, human rights, and religion? And what role you think religion can play in changing our mentality to the environment? Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, dear Jolt. We now move to our fifth representative of the political group, Stini Cox. Stini, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and may I first compliment you for taking the lead in organizing this Council of Europe Environmental Day. That is an achievement of you and our Assembly. And may I also thank especially Madame de Wever and all those numerous young activists throughout the world who worldwide contribute so much in making us politicians aware that our very future is at stake. And if we do not act now and do not act decisively to halt climate change and the disastrous pollution of the planet, we are really in a deep crisis. In April of this year, this Assembly, with a very large majority, called upon the Committee of Ministers to prioritize the development of new legal instruments aimed at ensuring the right to a safe, healthy and sustainable environment for present and future generations, and making it a legal obligation. The Secretary General tells us today, it's only 6 months later, that the Committee of Ministers is indeed debating the issue in depth. That is positive news. So we are working hard, and we are working hard to make the right to a healthy environment an accepted fundamental right. But, however, the essential question of me to the activist, Madame de Wever, is, are we working hard enough? Are we going fast enough? And if not, what then? Le déluge? Or do you still see, as a representative of the next generation, any positive way out of this horrendous crisis? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tini. A lot of questions. If you allow me to direct them a little bit, I would like to start with President Arden, with the question that I find particularly interesting from Jolt. Indeed, we link environment to human rights, and what is the role of religion, I suppose, in the global sense, to this effect? If you could respond to that, dear Mr. President, in a brief moment. You have the floor.
Egy valami biztos, hogy erre a kérdésre nem lehet röviden válaszolni. Tehát, ha valaki erre kísérletet tesz, akkor én szívesen átadom neki a mikrofon, de szerintem ez egy reménytelen vállalkozás, hogy röviden válaszoljunk erre. Németh Zsolt idézte Ferenc pápának a Laudato Si című enciklikáját, ami 2015-ben jelent meg. Nem tudom, hogy a teremben ülők közül hányan olvasták, vagy legalább olvastak belőle részleteket. Egy meglehetősen terjedelmes könyvecske ez, sok magvas gondolattal. Ha Ferenc pápa 170 oldalt szánt ennek a kérdésnek a megválaszolására, biztos, hogy nekem ez nem fog néhány perc alatt sikerülni. És ráadásul van egy ennél rövidebb, de szintén iránymutató, Glasgow elé időzített nyilatkozat, azt inkább nyilatkozatnak hívnám. elsőként jelent ez meg, vagy első alkalommal jelent ez meg ebben a formában, ebben az aláíró körben. Ez néhány héttel ezelőtt született meg, amit Ferenc pápa, a konstantinápolyi pátriárka és a Canterbury érsek írt alá. Ott rövidebben, nem 170 oldalon, hanem 4 oldalon fogalmazzák meg számunkra azokat a gondolatokat, amelyek vallásos emberek számára, független attól, hogy milyen tanítást követnek, a környezeti fenntarthatóság szempontjából, a teremtett világ védelme szempontjából megszívelendők. Ha mégis eleget kellene tennem Zsolt felkérésének, és röviden válaszolni, akkor a válasz valahogy így hangozna. Robert Schumannnak tulajdonítják azt a mondást, hogy Európa vagy keresztény lesz, vagy nem lesz. Hogyha most ezt a gondolatot átfordítanám a mai tanácskozás logikájára, akkor azt mondhatnám, hogy az emberi civilizáció vagy fenntartható lesz, vagy nem lesz. Ebben pedig a vallásnak és a vallásos, kapcsolódásoknak kitüntetett szerepe lesz.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I have another reflection I would like to, I don't know whether Roberto Fico is still with us. I hope so. Can someone give me a sign whether Speaker Fico is still there? Okay, we'll see if he pops up. Then I would go to our judge, if you allow me to do so, because you didn't scare us enough, as far as I'm concerned. But I do have a very specific question, because I had a discussion with a non-disclosed member of the court yesterday. I'm not going to mention any names. But he told me that the mere fact that this goes into one of the reflections of the colleagues' groups leaders, that the mere fact that we pass resolutions, but more specifically pass recommendations, and in this case unanimously with very clear elements, to what extent are they taken into account when the court handles, treats, and delivers judgments on environmental cases? Could you give us an insight in that, please?
Thank you very much. I'd be pleased to. As I alluded to in my short contribution, the court does feel itself both embedded in other international instruments, be it Paris, be it Aarhus, be it other binding instruments, as well as what we call soft law, which is non-binding instruments. So it's not a protocol, it's not the convention, it's not a treaty, but it is recommendations and resolutions adopted by the Parliamentary Assembly. So we particularly have regard to what happens in this House and happens in the Committee of Ministers. And therefore, it will no doubt be taken into account, and it will be given a fair amount of weight, the fact that it was adopted unanimously this morning, I would expect. But I think it is also clear that it is soft law, and it therefore can't change the legal framework which we as a court are required to adjudicate on, and some of the limitations which I sought to identify. But it certainly is a strong message, which I suspect will be heard loud and clear when we have to come and look at it as a document which informs us about what the thinking and the European consensus is on an issue in which we're developing and being asked to develop our case law, which, as I said, is already kind of showing a certain trajectory, but it can't alter the basic framework.
Thank you for that. Translated into, let's say, easy language, we did create soft law this morning, which will be taken into account to the extent of the possible, if I can say so, by the court. Of course, now it is to the Committee of Ministers to consider to make it into less soft law, so to say. I would like to go to Anuna for a second. Many people have addressed you. If I translate a little bit what the group's leaders say, the question that I have is, how can we together, knowing what we are trying to do here, how can we together move forward instead of separately? Because I do believe that if we do not have the new generation on board, it really doesn't make any sense. And so how do you see, it's maybe a question difficult to answer today, but what would be some building blocks where we as Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, having passed what we have passed, and you as youth movement, environmental movement, how do you see us going forward but together?
Well, I completely agree with you that we definitely have to work together. And this is also why in my speech I addressed the fact that we applaud these resolutions because they are really good. But it is about consistency at the end of the day. And as I said, it is really hard for us young people to take these resolutions seriously if on the other side of the door there's other things happening, as we all know. And so one of the biggest issues that we as a movement have identified when it comes to the climate crisis is not that we deny climate change. We are past that. But we deny the crisis of it. And in the narratives in the media and in the narratives about policies and in the way we sell these policies, we are minimizing the fact that we are in an existential crisis and that we need a radical system change. And we as a young generation are not gonna compromise for anything less than that. So if you want to work together, we need to know that you take the system change seriously, that you take our future seriously. And if you look at science now, if you look at the new IPCC reports, you clearly are not. So working together means facing the climate crisis and acting accordingly.
Thank you, Anona. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, you're always welcome, even with a lot of more people, to basically give us your insight and helping us to forge basically a better future for all of us. At this stage, I would like to go to the 5 next speakers because I didn't, Madam Secretary General, get a very specific one to you, except if you wish to comment on the reflections, if I may say, of our 5 groups leaders. Please, you have the floor.
Just very shortly, since the Committee of Ministers is not in the panel and it was actually requested to give an answer. Of course, it's a responsibility of the Committee of Ministers and it will deliberate. But let me just reiterate what I stated in my speech. That is that the Committee of Ministers is already working on that. I mentioned the working group that is set. And also not to forget that we have now 4th in row presidency having environment as the priority. And I think that is telling, starting with Georgia, Greece, Germany, and now Hungary. So I think by itself it testimonies of the will of this House, the Council of Europe all together this morning, voting unanimously 4 presidencies in a row, having this as the priority, all other bodies already working on this. So I would say that with respect to, of course, responsibility of the CM to continue working on that, I would say that I hope that the CM will adopt standards and human rights related to human rights and environment, and of course combat environmental crimes. So I think I just felt this needed to be said because there are a number of members, deputies around, but they are not in the panel. So as the one here, I wanted to reiterate this important message and this important fact, which is that a Committee of Ministers is already quite much involved in the work on that.
Thank you very much for that information, but of course we want a lot more. But it is true what you say, it is not that this is an unknown subject. But mentioning the 4 consecutive presidencies immediately, of course, I mean, I have to reach out to my good friend Speaker of the Italian Parliament, Roberto Fico. I hope that Roberto can get on the screen now. Roberto, I've got a question for you. After the Georgians and the Greek and the Germans and now the Hungarians, will you raise hell and make sure that the Italian presidency will keep the environmental issue as a priority during their presidency? And I link, so I'm putting pressure here, you know, and link to that, what are the steps that you feel that your presidency will have to make to get progress in terms of these additional protocols that have been requested by the Assembly in a unanimous way? Roberto, you have the floor.
Non c'è dubbio che le questioni ambientali saranno prioritare al 100%, ma vanno prioritare anche la Presidenza mia, ma l'interlocuzione con i meccanismi nazionali internazionali. Non c'è anche dubbio che tutto quello che anche si fa qui con l'approvazione all'unanimità di questi documenti io li riporterò nelle commissioni competenti dove si dovrà aprire un dibattito e sviluppare queste tematiche. Come già ho detto, anche
Roberto,
siamo
can I stop you 1
inserire nella
second?
nostra Costituzione
Roberto, 1
importanti cambi, modifiche, anzi aggiunte rispetto alla questione ambientale, che quindi la Costituzione, che è la nostra legge madre, alla fine andrà ad influenzare tutto il Paese. Noi stiamo cercando di cambiare modello di produzione, un cambio di paradigma, e io credo che alla fine insieme a tutta l'Unione Europea ce la faremo e non solo.
Well, I understood from the little Italian I speak that Roberto said that he is fully on board with the paradigm shift, and at least what he is, as far as he is concerned, and I'm looking at my colleagues who do speak Italian, I understand a bit of it, that at least to my understanding, Roberto will be one of those who will, from his side, make sure that the environmental issue stays on the priority list of consecutive presidencies. That is, if I got it right. I'm looking at Roberto again, but he's gone, but I suppose that is the case. Let me now go to our 5 next speakers. 1 minute. Yes. Roberto. Well, I was just translating you. Voilà, you see, I was right. Oof. So my language skills are still more or less there. Let me now move to our 5 next speakers. 1 minute, please. We have Marina Berlingueri, Emin Gunay, Claude Kerne, Anjaka Juhas, and Vladimir Vardanyan. We start with Marina Berlingueri. Marina, you have the floor.
Presidente, la crisi climatica sta aggravando le disuguaglianze globali. Dobbiamo arrivare in tempi molto brevi alla definizione di un nuovo concetto di diritto ambientale riconosciuto da tutti. Il diritto a un ambiente sano appare sempre di più come essenziale per il godimento effettivo di altri diritti fondamentali e le istituzioni hanno il dovere di impegnarsi per garantire una tutela effettiva dei cittadini. Ieri il professor Sachs ci ha ricordato che il mondo si aspetta che l'Europa continui ad essere baluardo e guida nel rispetto dei diritti umani, ruolo che l'Europa ha acquisito grazie al funzionamento delle sue istituzioni democratiche e alla loro capacità di esercitare la democrazia rappresentativa, traducendo in leggi le risposte ai bisogni dei cittadini. Pertanto, per contrastare la catastrofe climatica, le istituzioni devono adoperarsi per favorire dibattito e confronto costanti e devono arrivare in fretta a scelte politiche concrete che consentano a tutti di vivere in un ambiente sano e sicuro. Sono scelte urgenti. Grazie.
Thank you. I now pass to Emin Gunay. Emin, you have the floor. I think it is online.
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, a decent physical environment is a precondition for a life of dignity and worth. As the climate crisis worsens, countries have had to rethink economic development and look for ways to halt the destruction of irreplaceable natural resources and pollution of the planet, and recognize the right to a safe, healthy, and sustainable environment as an indispensable human right. As a country suffering from the adverse effects of the climate change, such as the wildfires of this summer, Turkey attaches utmost importance to combating climate change. I would like to share with you that our President, Mr. Erdogan, has recently announced that the Paris Agreement will be submitted to Turkish Parliament for ratification and that Turkey will be fulfilling its obligations in line with the constructive steps to be taken and within the framework of our national contribution statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nous passons maintenant à Claude Kern, qui, je suppose, est dans la salle. Claude, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous avons enfin pris conscience que nous dégradons l'environnement dans lequel nous vivons et que cela menace notre santé, mais aussi la pérennité de notre espèce sur Terre. Je suis donc heureux que notre Assemblée se saisisse aujourd'hui de la question environnementale et de son rapport avec les droits humains. Le droit à vivre dans un environnement sain a été introduit en droit national par plusieurs États membres aujourd'hui. Aujourd'hui, le bilan de la mise en œuvre de l'accord de Paris n'est pas satisfaisant. D'après un rapport de l'ONG Climate Action Tracker, de toutes les nations signataires du traité, seule la Gambie a pris des mesures concrètes suffisantes pour respecter ses engagements. Je souhaite donc que des engagements plus fermes soient pris lors de la prochaine COP26 à Glasgow. Faisons nôtre la citation de Saint-Exupéry, nous n'héritons pas de la terre de nos ancêtres, nous l'empruntons à nos enfants.
Merci Claude. Nous passons à Hanyalka Juhas. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have the common responsibility to fight against climate change. Climate change is a serious effect on water security. That is why preserving our clean water supply and providing water accessibility around the world is not just an environmental issue, but a national security issue as well. Hungary is in the front line of solving global water problems, and we are very proud of that. We organized several international conferences like the Budapest Water Summit and the upcoming Planet Budapest Sustainability Conference in 2022. I would like to ask you, Your Excellency, President Mr. Ader, do you think that drinking water shortage has a key role in increasing challenges in environmental protection, and what can international organizations like the Council of Europe do in related global problems like water scarcity and water crisis? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. We now take Vladimir Vardanyan, fifth speaker, after which we will come back to some of you on the panel, and we will try to conclude at 5 o'clock because we're already half an hour over time, but I'm glad that we did, and I do say thank you very much to all of our panelists to stay on board so long. So Vardanyan, you have the floor. Vladimir, I don't see you. No Vladimir Vardanyan, okay. Then we just take Lucas Savikas. Is Lucas in the room? Lucas, you got lucky. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been on board. Please do so.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear panelists. Thank you for this opportunity. A couple of points. Among the speakers today, we have heard the very clear voice of the future. Therefore, there is no question about it. We all need to have the right to safe, healthy, and clean environment. But today, we also have to be honest with ourselves. Some of us have disproportional rights to cleaner environments than others. It is like a vicious circle. Disadvantaged groups are more exposed to adverse effects of global warming, which in turn increases their vulnerability to damage caused by natural hazards and lowers their capacity to cope and recover. Therefore, I would like to ask our honorable panelists, what are concrete solutions, in your opinions, do you do in order to improve the environment for socially vulnerable groups? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to, in a diligent way, give the floor to the President of Hungary on a specific topic, and then I will have the same topic, Anuna. That's a challenging one, also to you. And I think that you deserve to have the last word in this event. So, dear President Narden, you spoke, and this comes a bit in some of the remarks, about the change of our economic thinking. We discussed it a little bit over lunch. I think that we, to some extent, even large extent, are maybe thinking over the same lines. And so, what is this change in economic thinking that might be in your mind, because you are now at a spot where you decide? And then I will have the same question, Anuna, to you. I hope it's not too challenging. And then see what you think about that, not yet having the opportunity to decide, and who knows in the near future having the opportunity to decide, but having us move into the right direction. Just one small remark, maybe we politicians might be the head, but the young people are the neck, and you know what makes turn the head, is the neck that makes the head turn. So, dear President, could you have a short reflection on this question, and then I will go to Anuna, offering her the last words of this event and addressing the same question. Dear Mr. President, you have the floor.
Akik már régebb óta részt vesznek különböző nemzetközi szervezetek munkájában, jó magam is voltam az Európai Parlament tagja néhány éven keresztül, azoknak az a tapasztalata, hogy minden ilyen tanácskozás a végén időzavarba fullad, most is úgy látom ez történik. és aztán mindig csak röviden lehet válaszolni kérdésekre. Így aztán most távirati stílusban. Vízhiány, mit lehet tenni? De azt szoktuk mondani, a 20. század az olaj évszázada volt, a 21. század az a víz évszázada lesz, szerintem már nem lesz, hanem már most is az. Mit kell tenni? Először is meg kell szüntetni a szennyezést, hiszen hiába van sok vízünk, hogyha az a folyó az el van szennyezve, akkor nem tudjuk használni annak vizét. A második, meg kell védeni a vízbázisainkat, hiszen ez az első számú forrása annak, hogy a lakosságot jó minőségű ivóvízzel lássuk el. A harmadik, csökkenteni kell a hálózati veszteségeket, hiszen vannak olyan országok, ahol 70-80%-a a hálózatba jutatott víznek eltűnik, elveszik a hálózat rossz állapota miatt. A negyedik, új technológiák meghonosítására van szükség. Ez alapvetően leginkább az öntözést érinti, bár érinti a szennyvíztisztítást is és sok minden mást. Egyetlen példát csak az idő rövidsége miatt Izraelben hatod annyi vízből, tehát 1/6 vízből állítanak elő egységnyi mezőgazdasági terméket más országokhoz képest. A második kérdés az a közgazdasági gondolkodás megváltoztatása volt. Erre aztán tényleg nem lehet röviden válaszolni, a célt mondom el, hogy ma ugye GDP-ben számolunk. Tehát, hogyha egy beruházást megvalósítunk, akkor azt mondjuk, hogy ez a beruházás mondjuk 10 millió euró volt, akkor 10 millió euróval nőtt a beruházás, a sikeres beruházás végén a GDP. De hogyha nem számítjuk hozzá, hogy a beruházás, amikor elkezd termelni, az talajt szennyez, vizet szennyez, esetleg levegőt szennyez, veszélyezteti az emberi egészséget, akkor és mindennek a kártételeit összeadjuk, akkor valójában nem növeltük a GDP-t, hanem lehet, hogy csökkentettük azt. Tehát ezért mondtam azt, hogy az úgynevezett externáliákat, azokat be kell számítani, és nem én mondom ezt jogászként, hanem egy Nobel-díjas amerikai közgazdász mondta ezt a Nobel-díja átvételekor, William Nordhaus volt ez, aki azt mondta, hogy ha nem számítjuk be az úgynevezett externáliákat a gazdaság teljesítményébe, akkor azért hosszabb távon, társadalmi szinten fogunk sokkal, de sokkal magasabb árat fizetni. Elnök úr, ennél rövidebben nem tudok válaszolni, sajnálom.
No, but you were going well. I mean, you could have continued as far as I'm concerned, but time is a bit limited. Being a business school alumni myself, I mean, I recognize some of that. Like, this is a reasoning of total cost instead of singular cost. But the one thing lacking in my view, and it has been touched, is the issue of opportunity cost. What if we do not do something? What is the cost we incur if we don't do something? It's not that I'm pitching that to you, Anuna, but you have the floor. Please give us your thoughts, and I'm very pleased that I can give the last word of this event, or the last words, to the young generation. You have the floor.
Thank you for giving me the last word. That is most definitely an honor. To quickly respond to the question, our economic system is built for few people. And it's built for a few people around the world. And it's standing on pillars of exploitation and racism and colonization. The people that are least responsible right now for the climate crisis are facing the toughest consequences. So the climate crisis is a human rights crisis. We can only take this seriously if we revise the way we look at our economy, if we revise the way we look at money, if we look at why we have the luxuries that we have today in the Western world and what they are actually built on. They're built on exploitation of human rights. And therefore, I don't even call myself a climate activist. I call myself a human rights activist. And it's the people that are currently facing the toughest consequences, the real consequences of the climate crisis, that should have a say in these debates, that should have the platform, like me, like I just had, to debate about these things, because they are the ones that are being exploited because of the way that we built this world. I want to thank you very much for giving me the platform, and I hope you keep doing this, because it is extremely important that young people like me, not only from Europe, but also from the Global South, many of my friends who are facing the direct consequences of the climate crisis, are also being granted these stages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anuna. By the way, you're always welcome. As all the other panelists, obviously, are always welcome, but you specifically are always welcome to join us. This concludes Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear panelists, thank you very much also online for having been with us. I would just like to conclude with one small sentence that I said at the beginning of the sitting when addressing the environmental issue, and I quoted a little bit of Hamlet, but in a different way. It was not like to be or not to be, that's the question, but the question that I put is to lead or not to lead. Basically, to lead or to follow. And I said, I say we lead, and today, that is what we have done. Thank you very much, and see you soon, all of you. Thank you.
Very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you take your seats for the next session, please? Thank you. We now have the joint debate on 3 reports on the theme of environment and climate change. The first, though these are not necessarily in the order in which they would appear, but the first is titled Combating Inequalities in the Right to a Safe, Healthy and Clean Environment, and that is document 15349, for which the rapporteur is Ms. Edith Estrella from the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. The second is titled Climate and Migration, that is document 15348, for which the rapporteur was Monsieur Pierre-Alain Fridès from the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons. And the third report is titled Research Policies and Environmental Protection, which is document 15357, for which the rapporteur is Monsieur Olivier Becht from the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and the Media. In order to finish by 7:30, we will interrupt the list of speakers at about 6:45 to allow time for the reply and the votes. The rapporteurs have 10 minutes in total, of which 7 minutes is for your opening remarks and 3 minutes for your reply. And I'd like to start by calling Monsieur Becht to present the third report from the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media. And you have 7 minutes. I believe he's on the line.
Oui, bonjour Monsieur le Président. Je suis vraiment désolé de ne prendre la parole qu'en distanciel. J'étais dans l'hémicycle il y a quelques instants, mais malheureusement je dois repartir sur Paris. Voilà, en urgence, et donc je vais être obligé de le faire en distanciel. Voilà. Nous avons eu tout à l'heure une bonne illustration des urgences climatiques. Cette urgence climatique, elle devient une réalité en Europe. Plusieurs centaines de morts cet été dans des méga-inondations ou des méga-feux. On sait tous que nous sommes astreints à respecter l'objectif zéro carbone en 2050. Mais 2050, pour agir, c'est demain. Et nous savons que la seule solution pour y arriver, c'est de sortir progressivement des énergies fossiles. Or, aujourd'hui, il n'y a aucune énergie, aucune qui peut remplacer totalement le pétrole et le gaz. Nous devons donc augmenter nos efforts pour rechercher et découvrir des énergies nouvelles. Nous ne sommes finalement qu'au XXIe siècle. Il y a 120 ans, on ne savait pas ce qu'était l'énergie atomique. On l'a recherchée, on l'a découverte, et donc il est probable qu'il y ait encore dans la nature d'autres énergies que nous devrons rechercher, découvrir et développer. Et d'autre part, nous avons un défi au niveau des énergies renouvelables. Nous savons que ces énergies sont intermittentes, elles ne sont pas là tout le temps. On n'a pas du vent en permanence, on n'a pas du soleil en permanence. Et donc, sauf si on accepte de ne se doucher que quand il pleut ou de brancher le frigo que quand il y a du soleil, eh bien, il faut nécessairement stocker les énergies. Et donc, pour stocker ces énergies, il faut des batteries. Et pour les batteries, il faut des matériaux, du nickel, des terres rares, du cobalt, du lithium. Et nous n'avons pas nécessairement en Europe ces matières. C'est donc une dépendance que nous avons aujourd'hui sur ces matières pour faire les batteries, comme nous en avions autrefois en matière de pétrole. Il y a donc un enjeu essentiel où il faut agir. On a construit l'Europe sur les énergies. En 1950, la Communauté européenne du charbon et de l'acier, avec le noyau dur européen. En 1957, c'était la Communauté de l'énergie atomique. Et on a aussi constitué des stocks stratégiques sur le pétrole. Ce que nous vous proposons aujourd'hui, c'est de l'envisager également pour les matières premières nécessaires aux énergies renouvelables, sans quoi on ne pourra pas agir et assurer la transition énergétique. Ce que nous proposons dans le rapport, c'est de faire un accord partiel sur ces questions au Conseil de l'Europe, et d'envisager, pourquoi pas, une banque des ressources stratégiques pour créer et gérer ces stocks. C'est aussi finalement travailler pour la paix, car au niveau du Conseil de l'Europe, cela permet d'associer tout le monde et de faire en sorte que tous nos pays qui possèdent pour certains des énergies fossiles puissent aussi anticiper et participer à la prospérité de demain. Une prospérité partagée pour tous, une planète viable pour tous, eh bien, cela nous semble être le premier des droits de l'homme pour le futur. C'est le cœur de mission de notre organisation et c'est ce que nous vous proposons à travers ce rapport, c'est de pouvoir s'engager plus en avant pour le climat, pour la planète, en faisant en sorte eh bien, de travailler sur ces énergies renouvelables, de mutualiser les efforts de recherche et de faire en sorte que nous puissions partager et gérer demain des stocks de matières premières qui seront indispensables pour les batteries qui feront fonctionner nos énergies renouvelables. Je vous remercie de votre attention et je m'excuse encore des conditions dans lesquelles je fais mon intervention. Je me reconnecterai tout à l'heure évidemment pour répondre aux questions. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beck. I now call on Mrs. Streller to present the first report for the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues. Aujourd'hui est un jour historique pour l'Assemblée parlementaire du Conseil de l'Europe. Toute la journée est dédiée au débat sur le changement climatique, c'est-à-dire un débat sur l'avenir de l'humanité, un débat à propos de notre avenir et de l'avenir de nos enfants. Je tiens tout d'abord à remercier et à féliciter mes collègues rapporteurs de cet après-midi, Olivier et Pierre-Alain. Je suis fière de participer avec deux rapports, crise climatique et état de droit, dont nous avons débattu ce matin, et lutte contre les inégalités en matière de droit à un environnement sûr, sain et propre, que je vous présente maintenant. Je vais commencer pour vous poser une question. Quelle planète voulons-nous laisser à nos fils, à nos filles et aux générations futures? La Terre ne nous appartient pas, nous l'empruntons à nos enfants. C'est à nous de la préserver afin que les générations futures puissent l'habiter avec santé, bien-être et sécurité. Le changement climatique touche un monde caractérisé par de profondes inégalités économiques, sociales, de genre, etc. Ces inégalités sont amplifiées par les crises, notamment par la crise pandémique et en particulier par la crise climatique. Le dérèglement climatique crée de nouvelles inégalités et vient renforcer des inégalités sociales déjà existantes. La lutte contre le changement climatique doit s'accompagner de lutte contre toutes les inégalités. Selon l'Organisation mondiale de la santé, 23% des décès en 2012 dans tout le monde seraient attribuables à des nuisances environnementales, chiffre qui a certainement augmenté au cours de la dernière décennie. Certaines populations sont plus exposées aux effets du changement climatique et ont moins de moyens pour y faire face et s'adapter. Mon rapport se concentre sur les défis environnementaux spécifiques pour les jeunes, les Roms, les peuples autochtones et les femmes et énumère un certain nombre de dispositions qui devraient figurer dans toute nouvelle législation. Et j'identifie les inégalités les plus critiques en matière d'accès au droit à un environnement sûr, sain et propre, et je formule des recommandations sur la façon de les réduire. Je mets l'accent sur le devoir des pays développés d'aider les pays les plus pauvres à gérer les changements climatiques qui les affectent le plus. Si le nombre de catastrophes naturelles est similaire pour l'ensemble des États depuis 1970, le nombre de morts est 10 fois plus important dans les pays les plus pauvres. Dans l'esprit de la Convention sur la lutte contre la violence à l'égard des femmes et la violence domestique, un nouveau texte devrait inclure un mécanisme des 4 P, prévoyant la prévention, la protection, les poursuites et les politiques, en y ajoutant un 5e P qui serait l'engagement des parlements. Chers collègues, en tant qu'élus, nous sommes en première ligne dans la lutte contre les inégalités de toutes sortes et contre le changement climatique. Développer un consensus relève de notre responsabilité d'élus. D'un côté, il est impératif de sensibiliser le public sur les effets du réchauffement climatique. De l'autre côté, il est essentiel de mettre en place des mesures protectrices et compensatoires pour les groupes déjà défavorisés. En effet, quand on craint de perdre son emploi, quand on n'a pas d'accès à la protection sociale, quand on craint de ne pas pouvoir nourrir sa famille du jour au lendemain, on peut être moins concerné par l'avenir de la planète. C'est notre responsabilité d'écouter, d'expliquer et de s'assurer que personne ne soit oublié. Pour tout ce que je viens d'exposer, je suis convaincue qu'il est urgent un changement de paradigme dans le droit international et national, ainsi que dans les politiques gouvernementales, afin de garantir qu'un environnement sain soit reconnu comme droit humain fondamental. Le présent rapport n'a pas vocation à établir le fondement juridique de ce type de législation. Toutefois, si l'on veut s'attaquer aux causes du changement climatique et s'efforcer de minimiser les inégalités dans l'application des droits environnementaux, il convient de réfléchir plus avant à la relation entre l'environnement et l'humanité elle-même. Je propose à l'Assemblée un nouvel instrument juridique contraignant pour protéger le droit à un environnement sûr, sain et propre. Jusqu'à présent, la forme que devrait prendre ce texte n'a pas fait l'objet d'un accord. Cependant, il y a un consensus sur la nécessité de traduire les droits environnementaux en un corpus auquel les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe pourraient adhérer et qu'ils pourraient mettre en œuvre. Pour conclure, je tiens à rappeler les collègues qu'en 1995, à Beijing, lors de la conférence mondiale sur les femmes, une déclaration indique que les femmes ont un rôle fondamental à jouer dans l'adoption de modes de consommation, de production et de gestion des ressources naturelles durables et écologiquement rationnelles. Cette même déclaration contient un point K, dont le premier objectif dispose qu'il est nécessaire d'assurer une participation active des femmes aux prises de décision concernant l'environnement à tous les niveaux. En tant que vigie des droits humains, de la démocratie et de la règle de droit, le Conseil de l'Europe doit appuyer les efforts de l'Union européenne pour s'assurer que personne n'est laissé derrière. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Estrella. I now call Mr. Friede to present the second report from the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons, and you too have 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice-président. Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues, la Terre se réchauffe et ce réchauffement va profondément impacter l'humanité. Et les évidentes répercussions sur la vie des hommes sont et seront très variables selon leur lieu de vie et surtout en fonction de leur capacité technologique et financière à s'adapter. Les répercussions physiques du réchauffement climatique vont prendre schématiquement à la longue 2 principaux aspects des scénarios annoncés. Soit le trop d'eau dans certaines régions du monde et dans d'autres, une aggravation du manque d'eau. Selon les rapports successifs du GIEC, à la fin du XXIe siècle, la hausse du niveau des mers en réponse à la fonte des glaces, en particulier au Groenland, en Arctique et en Antarctique, sera une réalité dont l'ampleur dépendra de l'intensité du réchauffement climatique. Il est question de 50 cm au minimum, mais les chiffres de 1 voire 2 mètres sont également avancés. Les conséquences évidentes de ces prévisions laissent augurer d'une catastrophe annoncée pour des centaines de millions de personnes vivant au bord immédiat des mers et qui verront l'élévation inexorable des eaux noyer leurs habitations et les pousser au départ. Pour certains, le danger sera épisodique en rapport avec des épisodes d'inondations massives liés à un événement climatique extrême, telles les conséquences dramatiques du cyclone Katrina sur la ville américaine de la Nouvelle-Orléans en 2005. Les bords de mer sans déclivité suffisante et les deltas fluviaux, surtout les plus peuplés, représentent des cibles privilégiées évidentes. Le Bangladesh correspond à l'exemple emblématique d'une région à risque. Une zone étendue, très peuplée, et située dans un pays en voie de développement, donc pauvre et incapable de résister aux aléas climatiques. Seront également concernés l'ensemble des îles et des îlots sans dénivellation qui seront irrémédiablement submergés, une situation courante dans les océans Pacifique et Indien. À l'inverse, les régions du monde qui déjà aujourd'hui se trouvent en situation de stress hydrique verront leur situation s'aggraver. Pensons au Proche et Moyen-Orient ou à l'Afrique subsaharienne. Cette dernière région représente la source programmée d'une migration conséquente, car elle cumule tous les critères. La pauvreté, une progression de la désertification et une véritable bombe démographique annoncée. En effet, les pays composant l'Afrique subsaharienne verront leur population doubler à l'horizon 2050. Ces prévisions prennent en compte le fait que les pays africains, dans leur grande majorité, n'ont à ce jour pas terminé leur transition démographique. Une femme au Niger, par exemple, met au monde aujourd'hui en moyenne 6 ou 7 enfants. De 3 millions d'habitants en 2060, ce pays compte aujourd'hui 23 millions d'habitants et pourrait en compter 65 millions en 2050. Et tous les pays de la région sont confrontés à une situation plus ou moins comparable. Des populations toujours plus nombreuses, toujours plus pauvres, avec une terre toujours moins capable de nourrir ses enfants, la voie grande ouverte à des migrations de masse. Le phénomène a déjà débuté, en Afrique en particulier. Les migrations que nous appellerons climatiques sont aujourd'hui essentiellement internes, soit dans le pays même, ou alors vers un pays voisin. Les migrations à distance vers l'Europe, par exemple, ne représentent qu'une faible partie. Car pour migrer au loin, il faut des moyens physiques et financiers qui ne concernent qu'une faible proportion des personnes concernées. Comme la nouvelle donne environnementale rend et rendra demain encore plus précaire l'accès aux biens de première nécessité, tels l'eau et la nourriture, dans certaines régions du monde, des luttes violentes et des conflits sont susceptibles de survenir, entraînant de graves crises humanitaires, avec ces victimes et ces personnes déplacées qui vont pousser également des gens à migrer en masse. C'est un cercle vicieux. Le constat est évident, les réponses le sont moins devant l'ampleur des moyens et des forces à mettre en œuvre. Mais tout ce qui sera fait sera déjà autant de faits, comme de petites pierres entassées une à une pour réduire les effets désastreux annoncés en termes de drames humains et d'atteinte aux droits essentiels des victimes, le droit des réfugiés climatiques. Alors que faire ? Tout d'abord, clairement, et on en a discuté juste avant, lutter de manière déterminée contre le réchauffement climatique. C'est une évidence. Se battre sans relâche pour que nos différents États prennent enfin à bras-le-corps la question climatique. Il n'est pas trop tard, juste encore le moment, pour réduire l'intensité des drames futurs. Ensuite, il faut prévenir et anticiper les phénomènes migratoires en établissant des cartographies les plus précises possibles des zones et des populations à risque, soit pour ainsi anticiper et organiser décemment leurs déplacements, soit pour permettre d'améliorer leur résilience, leur capacité à résister aux transformations annoncées dans leur cadre de vie, et ainsi réduire le nombre de personnes appelées à migrer. Concrètement, cette résilience, cela veut dire, pour permettre à ces personnes de résister, il faut leur assurer l'accès à l'eau, à l'alimentation, à la sécurité physique et sanitaire face au déchaînement de la nature, à l'énergie, à un travail, à un avenir sur place pour leurs enfants. Cela veut dire surtout améliorer la gestion des risques majeurs, inondations, tolérance face aux températures extrêmes, résistance face aux séismes de toutes sortes. On imagine facilement les efforts à déployer et les moyens financiers à investir, des efforts gigantesques. Ensuite, il faut sécuriser les migrations, car tous ne pourront conserver leur lieu de vie. La terre qui les a vus naître étant devenue trop inhospitalière, incapable de les nourrir ou trop dangereuse en lien avec des conflits pour se partager les maigres ressources restantes, un grand nombre de personnes devront choisir la voie de la migration et dans ce cadre, notre débat prend tout particulièrement son sens. Ces hommes, ces femmes, ces enfants sont des victimes innocentes et ont des droits. La nature se déchaîne contre eux, mais la responsabilité de ce qui leur arrive est partagée par l'humanité entière, tout particulièrement au sein des pays riches. On sait qui produit le plus de CO2. Les migrants climatiques doivent bénéficier d'un statut. Leur périple vers des terres plus hospitalières doit être encadré, sécurisé. Cela afin d'éviter les drames, les souffrances, les violences inacceptables dont sont victimes aujourd'hui ces populations en migration. Ce qui se passe en Méditerranée avec ces milliers de morts chaque année est une honte pour notre continent et la solidarité de toute l'Europe à l'égard des pays en première ligne est une nécessité urgente. L'Europe vieillit, sa démographie chancelle. Voyons l'immigration comme une opportunité. N'enfermons pas notre continent derrière une forteresse infranchissable. Tout cela va demander d'énormes moyens financiers. La coopération au développement avec les pays de départ doit s'intensifier et nous en appelons à la création d'un fonds de solidarité européen, voire mondial, en faveur des questions migratoires, car les défis, comme je l'ai dit, sont énormes et les besoins financiers colossaux. Chers collègues, pour terminer, je dirais que la question climatique est aujourd'hui le défi numéro 1 de notre civilisation. L'Europe doit être au rendez-vous de ce défi. Les populations les plus touchées aujourd'hui et demain comptent sur notre solidarité active pour soit les aider à résister sur place, soit les accompagner dans leur nécessaire migration. Un merci particulier au secrétariat et en particulier à Mme Angela Garabagiu pour son soutien précieux dans la réalisation de ce dossier. Et je vous demande de soutenir ce rapport qui pour moi est très important.
Thank you indeed, and thank you to all three rapporteurs. We now move to the speakers on behalf of political groups. Is Yulia Ovchinnikova here? Yes, the floor is yours. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Dear Mr. Chairman, dear Assembly, I'm honored and delighted to have this opportunity to speak on behalf of the ALDE Group on this vital topic, especially since they belong to both areas, to research and environmental protection. First, let me congratulate all rapporteurs with excellent reports and the draft resolutions. Research and development belongs to the strategic area, resource and instruments to combat global challenges, find new solutions, adapt to climate change, rethink economic models, and to develop the circular economy. And it's not the task for selected countries, it's the goal for the whole planet Earth. As researchers in environmental issues, I welcome the report and the recommendation to develop and financially specific research programs and at the same time support fundamental research. Unfortunately, sometimes the commercialization on influence for education and research funding and diminishes priority for the element analysis. Money is resource, not a goal in science. We call member states to establish instruments for a cross-sectoral and intersectoral collaborations and massive involvement of early career researchers. The young researchers should develop their skills in a more collaborative, more inclusive and open research environment. As national parliaments, we should look for new forms for research funding and make it more open and participatory. I would like to make also some fundamental suggestions. The resolution should promote open science as a critical priority in research policies in Europe, and especially in the climate action fields. According to a recent report of the Parliamentary Assembly, the current policies and efforts of Council of Europe member states to combat climate change and its impact remain insufficient. We need to rethink research assessment system and criteria of excellence, which are based on quantitative metrics, mostly today by qualitative approach, considering impact of the research outputs on the environment. So, finally, I would like to call the Assembly and Member States to support, invest, develop and promote national framework for the climate service in Europe. Dear colleagues, I strongly call to support the resolutions and encourage all member states to implement recommendations that will make incredible tectonic changes in the European research environment for the public good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Mr. Alex Goncharenko here? Yes, here I can see him now. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, and today we're speaking about extremely important issue. It's climate, it's environment, it's about future. And speaking about this issue, I think one of the most important things are global warming and greenhouse gas emission, which is responsible for this. And I want to stress our attention on one topic. It's a methane emission. Actually, methane is much more powerful in trapping the heat than carbon dioxide. And it means that it has more than 80 times more global warming effect than carbon dioxide has. If we're speaking about human caused methane, it gives not less than 1/4 of global warming today. So that is extremely important topic. And if we will take a look on the countries which are responsible for methane emission in the world, unfortunately, number one is a member state of the Council of Europe, Russian Federation. Number two is United States, number three is Iran. Certainly we need to demand from all countries to decrease methane emissions. By the way, when we're speaking about the United States, there is a common decision of United States and European Union to decrease not less than 30% of methane emission till 2030. But coming back to Russian Federation, what we can find there, unfortunately quite opposite thing. The major part of these methane emissions in Russian Federation, and by the way, Russia gives 20% of worldwide methane emission to atmosphere, just imagine. So, but major part plays their gas transportation system, pipelines. And today, in 2020, Russia showed on 40% increase of methane emissions. Despite the fact that in the world we have a small decrease of methane emissions, in Russia has a big increase of methane emission. So when we are building such projects like Nord Stream 2, when we are launching them and they're starting to work, it means that we are not only, Russian gas is not only dirty, is not dirty only because of money which are used from this gas to wars, to terrorist attacks, like war in Ukraine or Georgia, or terrorist attacks in Czech Republic or United Kingdom. It's not only metaphorically dirty, it's literally dirty, because with methane it kills our planet. So first of all, I think we need to demand from Russian Federation to decrease methane emissions. Without this, we should not accept the launching of Nord Stream 2, for example. And we need to push them to be more ecological. If we will not do this, it will mean that Putin is killing the planet with his gas. So our slogan today is less gas, especially less Russian gas.
Thank you very much. Mr. Socrates Famelos from Greece is the next speaker. Is he in the Assembly?
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Chair, dear colleagues, the decision to devote this day on the climate and the environmental crisis is the least that we can do. I would like to thank all the rapporteurs and the speakers for setting our discussion. This interconnected climate and environmental crisis is deep and systemic. It challenges our society, our institution, democracy and basic human rights, where it is time to include the right to a safe, clean, healthy and sustainable environment. But despite high-level political agreements, we are still very far from effective action on the ground. Climate catastrophes all over the planet, the forest fires in Greece this summer, show us that we must act now. We need deep and systemic change. We need a great revolution. We need rapid changes in production patterns, in consumptions, in everyday life. These necessary systemic changes should take place in a fair, socially equitable and democratic way. The transition to a carbon-neutral economy should be effective, rapid, and should be combined with actions to protect ecosystems and to ensure a pollution-free environment. It is evident that transition cannot be achieved with the current economic model and cannot be achieved by market forces alone. The state should design, lead, and guarantee a just and inclusive transition. This is the only way to ensure that no one is left behind. We are again seeing the evidence in the energy crisis that affects energy prices and living costs in all our countries these days. The energy crisis challenges the liberal business model of the energy sector. Privately run energy supply companies face financial issues, but the result is that access to affordable energy for households and business is not secured. This energy crisis adds on the deep economic consequences of the pandemic and reminds us of the importance of state involvement and regulation, as highlighted in one of the reports this morning. State involvement to secure citizens' access to basic goods and to human rights. Social justice and democracy are essential elements for the green transition, and we have not yet managed to find the correct path. The climate crisis already deepens social and economic inequalities. Citizens' assemblies can indeed be a step for more democratic decision-making, but we must ensure that concerns and resolutions of citizens are not bypassed, particularly when they challenge government policy. This is why young people are asking us to change the system. They feel that in our system, their voices are not heard. We must trust and provide evidence of our trust in society. We also have a collective responsibility towards these people and those countries that suffer most from the impacts of climate change. Not only providing development aid, but providing real access to research and technology resources. And in our discussion about new research and technology, we should not neglect the role of social science and transdisciplinarity if we are to address the actual societal needs and concerns. I would like to conclude by reiterating that the green transition is a necessity, but it's also necessary that we have to prepare the transition and to ensure that it is implemented with democracy and social justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now go online for our next speaker, Jeremy Corbyn.
He has to request for the floor.
Mr. Corbyn, you have to request for the floor. There we are.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased that the whole day has been given over to the environment in this very important session of the Council of Europe. And the reports we've got in front of us are excellent and provide a very good legal and political way forward. But I think the standout contribution today has been from Anuna, the young environmental activist, who showed the determination and thirst of young people all over this continent and indeed all over the world to try and bring about a safer, cleaner environment for the future. The reports we're debating discuss the legal, the economic issues and the inequality issues that face the whole world, not just Europe. And I think we should think for a moment of the victims around the world of the current state of the world's environment. Children breathing polluted air in the world's major cities, life expectancy falling in many parts of the world because of air pollution, water pollution, and lack of health care. And the numbers of people around the world who are actually environmental refugees, been driven out of their own countries by land grabbing, by mining interests, and because of the poverty in which they have to live. The global inequality is absolutely enormous. So as we move towards COP26 in Glasgow in November, I think we have to be very clear that, first of all, net zero of emissions by 2030 is absolutely essential and achievable, but it will require concerted government action. And it will require an assessment of the effects of inequality across the world, but it will also require a serious assessment of the effects of trade and the pollution that comes from air travel as well as from shipping, and the need to reduce the volume of traffic in order to get us a cleaner environment. Can all this be achieved in an era of free market economics? I seriously doubt that. And I draw attention to the excellent statement made by Aditi Estrella earlier, in which she said, working class communities are those that suffer the worst. Those that work in industries that pollute are in danger of losing their jobs. It is only public intervention and public support for a transfer to a green industrial revolution that will bring about a defense of those jobs, those communities, and those living standards. The last thing I'd say is this, in the few seconds I've got left: a legal protection of the natural world, a legal protection of biodiversity, and an essence that in every major planning and investment decision we take on board the need to enhance our biodiversity and enhance our protection, and recognize that we as humans have got to live in step with nature, not by destroying nature and the very world on which our own lives depend. This is a crucial moment for all of us. I hope COP26 takes it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corbyn. I now call Theodoros Rousopoulos from Greece.
At your right, Mr. President, I will speak in Greek. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Συνδέω την προηγούμενη συζήτηση, η οποία έγινε με το κλείσιμο της προτροπής που μας έδωσε ο πρόεδρος της συνέλευσης, λέγοντας το εξής, ότι θα πρέπει να γίνουμε πιο ηγετικοί, δηλαδή να προβλέπουμε το μέλλον και όχι να ακολουθούμε αυτά τα οποία συμβαίνουν. Να προτρέχουμε έτσι ώστε να προβλέπουμε τα γεγονότα. Και θυμήθηκα μια συζήτηση που είχα πριν από πολλά χρόνια στο Μόναχο με τον Helmut Kohl, τον καγκελάριο ο οποίος έμεινε 16 χρόνια στο τιμόνι της Γερμανίας. Τρώγαμε ένα μεσημέρι λοιπόν σε ένα ωραίο εστιατόριο και τον ερώτησα, καγκελάριε, ποιο ήταν το πιο δύσκολο πράγμα που είχατε στην πολιτική σας καριέρα? Και μου είπε να πείσω ότι έβλεπα κάποια πράγματα που οι περισσότεροι δεν τα έβλεπαν και τα έβλεπαν μετά από 1 ή 2 χρόνια. Αυτό που συζητάμε σήμερα ουσιαστικά είναι η προβλεψιμότητα την οποία πρέπει να έχει ένας πολιτικός, ένα πολιτικό σώμα. Η προβλεψιμότητα δεν έχει να κάνει με τα στοιχεία εκείνα της αρχαίας ελληνικής τραγωδίας, όπου κάποιος μάντης έβλεπε πώς πετάνε τα πουλιά ή διάβαζε τα σύννεφα για να πει τι περίπου θα γίνει στο μέλλον. Εδώ η προβλεψιμότητα έχει να κάνει με πολύ συγκεκριμένα χαρακτηριστικά. Έχει να κάνει με την εμπειρία που αποκτήσαμε, για παράδειγμα, στο θέμα της μετανάστευσης όλα αυτά τα χρόνια. Έχει να κάνει με ζητήματα πραγματολογικά, δηλαδή με διαφορετικές συνήθειες, διαφορετικές συνθήκες, διαφορετικές κουλτούρες. Έχει να κάνει με πολιτικούς οι οποίοι ακολούθησαν λαϊκιστικές οδούς για να πείσουν τους πολίτες τους και κινήθηκαν σε επικίνδυνες για την Ευρώπη και την Ένωσή μας, την Ένωση του Συμβουλίου της Ευρώπης αλλά και την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, ατραπούς. Το μεταναστευτικό λοιπόν μας έχει δώσει ήδη εμπειρία. Η κλιματική αλλαγή μας έχει δώσει ήδη πληροφορία. Γνωρίζουμε όλοι ότι τα πάντα αλλάζουν. Άρα λοιπόν δεν δικαιούμαστε να μην προλάβουμε το τρένο αυτών των αλλαγών, να μην προβλέψουμε και να μην πάρουμε γρήγορα τις αποφάσεις που πρέπει. Η έκθεση του Προέδρου μας στην Επιτροπή του Προσφυγικού, τον οποίο και συγχαίρω, είναι ακριβώς σε αυτή την κατεύθυνση. Δηλαδή να δούμε τι ακριβώς έγινε τα τελευταία χρόνια με τους πρόσφυγες, τι γίνεται με την κλιματική αλλαγή και πώς μπορούμε να συνδυάσουμε το σεβασμό των ανθρωπίνων δικαιωμάτων με την ιδιαιτερότητα κάθε χώρας. Το Ευρωπαϊκό Λαϊκό Κόμμα πιστεύει σε μια διτή προσέγγιση σε αυτό το ζήτημα. Από τη μία πλευρά τηρούμε τις προβλέψεις του διεθνούς δικαίου και της Σύμβασης της Γενέβης, στοχεύοντας την προστασία της ανθρώπινης ζωής. Αλλά την ίδια στιγμή από την άλλη πιστεύουμε στην ανάγκη της φύλαξης των συνόρων, των ευρωπαϊκών συνόρων και της πάταξης των κυκλωμάτων εκείνων που εκμεταλλεύονται τον ανθρώπινο πόνο. Υπάρχουν συγκεκριμένες διατάξεις και διαδικασίες του διεθνούς δικαίου οι οποίες πρέπει να γίνουν σεβαστές. Η υποβάθμιση του περιβάλλοντος και τα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα ξεπερνούν τα σύνορα και επιζητούν καινούριες λύσεις. Η έκθεση την οποία συζητάμε, η έκθεση ειδικά για το περιβάλλον, για τη μετανάστευση, ακριβώς δίνει αυτές τις λύσεις. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Thank you. That brings to the end the list of speakers for political parties, and we move on to the main speakers list. And we start online with Kate Ossamore from the UK.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President, for calling me to speak in this joint debate on environment, climate crisis, inequality and migration. I would like to thank the rapporteurs on their reports. Dear colleagues, I believe that the climate crisis currently facing the world must be considered a major international priority. Climate change is causing mayhem across the world and is increasingly becoming a driver of poverty and vulnerability. We know this will only get worse. Immediate and serious action is needed to prevent extreme heat, droughts, floods, and poverty. There are over 65 million refugees and internally displaced people on the move seeking refuge. As greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise, extreme weather events are becoming more frequent. 3 out of 5 people in the world now live in water-stressed areas. Poverty, inequality, and climate change are interconnected crises. The terrible symptoms of deep-rooted causes of a broken global economy that funnels wealth upwards to an elite few, a power structure that traps women in a cycle of oppression. We all know governments subsidize gas and oil and fail to keep on track to hit climate targets. This will only ruin our planet. As parliamentarians, we must encourage our respective governments to divest away from fossil fuels and invest instead in renewable energy that is public-owned and wherever possible, community-controlled. If we are to deliver on our targets, then we, the international community, must start doing things differently. Key to doing different things is recognizing that inequality goes hand in hand with power imbalances. And unequal power relations within the international community is something that we must not shy away from tackling, however uncomfortable it may be to face up to reality. So we must start redistributing that power. I am convinced that there is already a powerful global movement of people changing the world for the better. Millions of citizens, activists and volunteers, trade unions, social movements, diaspora and faith groups giving their time and money and solidarity. Too often, international banks, agencies like the World Bank are out of touch with the very people they are meant to serve. Too often, because wealth and power sits in the global north with so-called experts, thousands of miles from the people and communities most affected by the crisis, allowing status quo to prevail and business as usual to continue. Far too often, the worst polluters have the power over the least polluters. We all have a responsibility to change this direction. In closing, I would end by saying I support the rapporteurs on their well-written reports. Let us come together and support their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Dubravka-Filipovsky.
Dear colleagues, this report shows all the gravity of the problem we are facing. It is predicted that close to 10 billion people will live in the planet by 2050, which will create additional pressure on limited resources and incite conflicts. And the register of environment threats indicates that up to 1.2 billion people from the poor and unstable areas such as Sub-Saharan and North Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East could be forced migrate by 2050. This will have huge social and political consequences. Mass deployments will lead to greater flows of migration to the most developed countries. Most of the migrants will end up in Europe. That is something that Europe must take into account. We saw what happened when, at the peak of the migrant crisis in 2015 and 2016, 2 million migrants set off to Europe, and we will all witness the political instability that caused it. I just want to remind you that most of those refugees passed through my country, Serbia, through the Balkan route, and that they were treated humanely as if we did not build a fence of shackles and wires along our border. In any case, if something is not done, in terms of environmental issues. The scale will be far greater than what we have seen in the past few years. This report comes at a time when the EU is trying to reform the existing common European asylum system, which has been negotiated since the beginning of the migrant crisis in 2015. Based on this report, my opinion is that the EU should address the causes of migration as well as the question of how it can empower the countries most at risk. Many countries have reduced their budgets for humanitarian and development aid in recent years. And because of COVID-19, there will be problems in allocating money to help underdeveloped countries. Therefore, it is necessary to consider what is in the strategic interest of countries when it comes to the problem of refugees and climate change, because some of the countries facing this problem have already found themselves in a vicious circle in which the struggle, scarce resources, breeds conflicts, and conflicts in turn further impoverish. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zia Altuniadis? Yes, sorry, there you are.
Dear colleagues, I would like to thank all the rapporteurs of their enlightening reports. Climate crisis, as we have been discussing the whole day, is among the most important problems of this era. We have been having constructive and courageous debate about climate crisis and trying to find ways and means how to cope with the negative consequences of those. I believe the reports that we have been having here in Hemicycle will enable the Assembly to adopt a holistic approach towards the possible solution for the climate change, like we did in the morning session today. Climate change and environment crisis have catastrophic effects on the nature and the mankind. Unfortunately, human beings still ignore this grim reality. People and companies continue to overexploit natural resources and have a consumption-based mentality. This is a vicious cycle perpetuated by the hand of the people. Human behaviors which are extremely harmful for the environment endanger lives of the mankind in turn in the form of climate change and environmental crisis. Dear colleagues, we have to transform our modes of production and consumption behavior into more environmental friendly manner. And first of all, we have to minimize the carbon emission in both industrial and consumer levels. And states must support the transition to green economy, and developed countries are required to transform some financial support to developing world and making some necessary arrangement to transform the whole economy into a green one. And energy transition must be done delicately as well. While switching to renewable energy from carbon-based resources, we should refrain from causing any new damages to the future. And establishing a circular economy also enables us to tackle climate change. I thank you all.
Thank you. Monsieur Jacques Maire. No? No? Merci. And online, I think we have Mr. Conal Nuralieva. Yeah? Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the floor. Firstly, I would like to express my deep gratitude to all rapporteurs for preparing such a detailed and influential report on these special topics. It would be appropriate to mention that an adequate environment is considered a precondition for the realization of other human rights, including right to life, food, health, and an adequate standard of living for us all. Obtaining the right to a safe, healthy, and clean environment has always been harder for low-income populations, countries, marginalized communities of color, gender, IDPs, and refugees. Looking at the issue from the perspective of Azerbaijan, I want to shed a particular light on the environmental terror committed by Armenia in the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan during the occupation. That included illegal activities such as the plunder of national resources, the pollution of water resources, the destruction of endemic flora and fauna. Armenians have destroyed half of the forest in the territory of the Besichai Reserve. After the liberation of our land, the water of Okchu River is intentionally being polluted by the industrial waste from the territory of Armenia. Obviously, Azerbaijan has been a target of the ecological terror committed by Armenia in the recent years, which is the main obstacle for achieving a healthy environment in my home country. Azerbaijan, on the other hand, has included inclusive environmental protection to its National Action Plan for 2020-2025. This year, we also banned hazardous form of plastic bags, progress in transitioning into renewable energy sources, and launched first ever green and smart village project in recently liberated Agali town of Zengilan. That has been done to ensure that environmental equality rights of rural people and nearly 1 million IDPs have also been proportionally protected. Coming to the solutions, I believe that member states should promote environmental human rights education and incorporate it to their program. Meanwhile, governments should support the establishment and strengthening of networks through which environmental human rights defenders will share their experiences and develop better strategies to promote environmental protection and hence ensure the right to a safe environment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now, Susana Sumelzo.
Necesitamos un planeta verde, pero estamos en alerta roja. Son palabras del secretario general de la ONU en la cumbre de líderes sobre el clima. Jóvenes de todo el mundo están movilizándose por la justicia climática, lo hemos escuchado hoy aquí, y defienden la salud de la naturaleza. Exigen a nuestros líderes que actúen ya. Lo estamos viendo estos días en Milán, en la conferencia juvenil sobre el clima. Y un medio ambiente seguro, sano, limpio, saludable es esencial para el pleno disfrute de los derechos humanos. Y en esta Asamblea Parlamentaria del Consejo de Europa trabajamos para la defensa, para la protección y para la promoción de los derechos humanos. Hay mucho trabajo por hacer para luchar contra el cambio climático y las desigualdades que este cambio climático provoca. Y los gobiernos tienen que tomar medidas urgentes para evitar un futuro sombrío en nuestro planeta. Y debemos actuar en todos los países colectivamente, ahora, y sin dejar a nadie atrás. Mi país, España, ha hecho de la transición ecológica una prioridad, poniendo a las personas en el centro de la acción y basándose en un marco regulatorio sólido, con un plan de energía y clima, movilizando 230.000 millones de euros en 10 años e invirtiendo el 39% de los 140.000 millones de euros de los fondos de recuperación europeos en temas relacionados con la transición ecológica. Aprobamos también en mayo la primera ley de cambio climático y transición energética. Es un ejemplo de lo que posiblemente están haciendo en más países y de lo que es nuestra obligación en los gobiernos. Pero en esta Asamblea Parlamentaria tenemos la obligación de asegurar la mayor protección de los derechos humanos, de las amenazas del medio ambiente. Nos lo exigen las generaciones actuales y, por supuesto, es un derecho de las futuras. Debemos actuar ya. Muchas gracias a las personas que han trabajado, a los compañeros, este informe.
Thank you very much. And now I call Mr. Zsolt Csencer-Zalan from Hungary.
The pressure towards Europe and the United States have become significant and permanent. The cause of the first wave was mainly the escape from armed conflicts, but a flood of economic migrants joined this process very soon. Massive numbers of migrants from the Middle East, Asia, North Africa, and sub-Saharan region are arriving at Europe's border. Especially at the later group, an increasingly significant cause is the impossibility of life in their home place due to climate change. The extreme temperature conditions result from global warming and the increasing frequency of drought on the one hand, and catastrophic floods and storms on the other hand. Agriculture production is declining or, in extreme cases, completely impossible. Due to ever less rainfalls and the growing population, access to healthy, clean drinking water is also becoming increasingly difficult. Of course, migration cannot be a solution to the climate change, as it does not address the cause, only the consequence, and to top of it, a wrong way. The involved countries or Europe alone have little to say. There is a need for global cooperation and coordinated actions to keep global warming within manageable levels. Carbon dioxide emission must be radically reduced. Social awareness campaigns are needed against the overpopulation of developing regions, because population explodes in these societies very rapidly, thanks to the decrease of the child mortality and an increase of life expectancy. Agricultural methods that adapt to the changed conditions and new irrigation techniques must be introduced. Investment and creating new jobs will help to the young people to stay in their homeland. Problems should not be treated symptomatically, but the causes have to be eliminated. This is especially true for migration. Let's not take the problem here, but bring the solution and help there. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. I call Mr. Per Lopez from Andorra. Since Mr. Per Lopez is not here, the floor goes to Ms. Maria Mezenseva from Ukraine.
Thank you, dear President. Дуже дякую. Colleagues, today we discuss a very important topic, but I don't see as many colleagues in the hall, unfortunately. Maybe more of them are online. You know, every morning when I wake up, I think myself, okay, many laws we proceed with in this honorable hall, and today we have proven the largest majority for a will to environmental issues. But what do we do ourselves every day to prevent terrible disasters which our planet will face by 2050. And you colleagues have named many numbers of these disasters. Like, for instance, almost 25 million people in 140 countries have changed their places of residence already in 2019. And over the time, climate change is expected to affect the intensity and geography of migration. So by 2050, 143 million domestic climate migrants will be registered. Colleagues, just before coming to here on Saturday in my constituency in Ukraine, we have collected 8.5 tons of trash next to a very well-known pound where many Ukrainians are resting during the summer. We have compared the statistics with the last year. It doubled. Does it mean we are increasing our responsibilities? Definitely not. I would like to inform you that Ukrainian government has taken recently a very responsible decision to make a climate fund, a fund which will have money to subsidize many environmental initiatives. I want to invite you all to a global initiative called Greening of the Planet, which Ukraine initiated 2 years ago. By now, we have managed to plant 15 million trees in 120 countries, and we're very proud of that. Our mission is more ambitious, to involve 100 million people by 2023, 100 million trees and 100 million people. We are connecting with this global initiative the whole planet, and the President is taking a very active role in that. Of course, dear colleagues, we're implementing the very important laws on waste management to start, recycling after the usage, everything we consume. We do understand that our future children of this planet have to breathe with completely different air than today. The emission of CO2 has to decrease. The Green Deal, amazing Green Deal agreement, which is voluntarily to join, all these are on our agenda. But let's remember what every one of us is doing every day for the environment. Thank you, dear President.
Thank you. And now I call Mr. Thomas Pringle from Ireland. Is he here in the hemicycle? Because he's not online. Since I cannot see him, I give the floor to Madame Serap Yassar from Turkey. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chers collègues, je tiens à remercier tous les rapporteurs pour leur importante contribution au débat sur le changement climatique et ses effets néfastes sur le droit à un environnement sûr, sain et durable. Bien que notre Assemblée ait abordé la question précédemment, nous avons tendance à négliger l'impact du climat sur les migrations. Les conflits politiques, les guerres civiles et les persécutions ont été identifiées comme les principales raisons de l'immigration et du déplacement forcé. Cependant, le changement climatique et le réchauffement climatique sont devenus un facteur de plus en plus important ces dernières années qui obligeait les gens à migrer. Les gouvernements, les organisations internationales et les ONG se sont efforcés d'explorer des solutions pour ralentir et inverser le changement climatique. Cependant, nous avons également besoin d'une approche proactive vis-à-vis des besoins des victimes du changement climatique. La migration due à des raisons indirectes, directes liées au climat devrait être abordée de manière systématique avec solidarité et action concertée entre les États membres. Je voudrais vous rappeler que les pressions migratoires actuelles font peser une charge excessive sur certains États membres, alors que le reste des pays hésitent à partager la charge. Tout d'abord, Tout en abordant la migration liée au climat, nous devons garder à l'esprit la nécessité d'un partage équitable de la charge entre les États membres. De plus, le système d'asile actuel dans la plupart des États membres ignorait les groupes vulnérables. Le traitement des groupes vulnérables, en particulier des enfants migrants et réfugiés, restait problématique. L'identification des personnes vulnérables et les réponses à leurs besoins doivent encore être améliorées. Si notre objectif est d'adopter une approche systématique et fondée sur les droits de l'homme envers ceux qui se déplacent en raison du changement climatique, nous devons établir des mécanismes adéquats pour protéger les groupes vulnérables, notamment des enfants. J'espère que ces efforts contribueront à construire une approche solide et systématique de protection des droits des victimes. Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. And now I call Madame Liliana Tanguy from France.
Monsieur le Président, je souhaite souligner la nécessité de lutter contre les inégalités en matière de droit à un environnement sûr, sain et propre, comme l'indiquait Madame Estrela dans son rapport. Car la relation entre l'exercice des droits humains et l'environnement s'affirme de plus en plus, et le droit à un environnement sain est actuellement inscrit dans plus de 100 constitutions dans le monde entier. Et en ce sens, l'Assemblée parlementaire du Conseil de l'Europe préconise un nouvel instrument juridiquement contraignant pour protéger le droit à un environnement sain, sûr et propre, mais tout nouvel instrument juridique devra prendre en considération un ensemble de sources d'inégalité et de discrimination. C'est le sens de notre réflexion au sein de ma famille politique qui s'oriente vers l'élaboration d'une convention sur l'environnement dans le cadre du Conseil de l'Europe, et ce qui rejoint aussi la recommandation du rapport de M. Altuniazaldis, d'une convention ad hoc spécialisée qui nous paraît une option pragmatique et dont la concrétisation serait plus rapide. Une révision de la Convention sur la protection de l'environnement par le droit pénal de 1998 pourrait être une première action à mener pour arriver à des résultats tangibles et concrets pour les citoyens. Je vous remercie.
Merci. And I call Ms. Olena Homenko from Ukraine.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Ms. Edith Estrela for her report. The core idea of the report deserves our unanimous support: access to a clean, healthy and safe environment for everyone, especially vulnerable groups. The effects of climate change are putting additional pressure on our governments to commit. However, the recent experience of inequalities exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis does not leave much hope for the poor countries. We cannot turn a blind eye on families struggling beyond the poverty line, local Roma communities, women left without adequate medical care. As mentioned in Para 7 of the draft resolution, the climate crisis will further create considerable economic damage and increase the disparities between the rich and the poor. Thus, we urge our other member states to support Para 12.3 on the draft resolution, strengthening and implementing the commitment by developed countries to help developing countries inherent in the 2015 Paris Agreements, in particular by implementing Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, which provides for financial support in mitigation of and adaptation to climate change, multi-source mobilization of climate finance, and regular quantitative and qualitative reporting on this action. I would like to highlight the significance of fighting the discrimination against indigenous people described in the report and the explanatory memorandum. The rapporteur draws our attention to the potentially disastrous consequences of climate change and industrial development on the indigenous communities, especially when the said groups are excluded from the dialogue about the decisions that can affect their lands and way of living. The Ukrainian parliament is devoted to cooperating with the indigenous people of our country, Crimea Tatars, car rides and cream chucks, and has recently passed a target law that defines their unique status, recognizes the representative bodies of indigenous people, safeguards their cultural heritage, and provides more opportunities for education in their native languages. Hence, we fully support the draft resolution para 13.2, which calls on countries where indigenous people are living to ensure they are consulted and take part in decisions related to their lands and ways of living, and in particular, that measures taken in the name of protection of environment do not affect their lives and livelihoods. Finally, it is important to continue gender mainstreaming in the climate crisis response, as the more inclusive the decision-making process, the higher is the quality of adopted policies. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Madame Marietta Caramanli from France, who will be speaking online.
Oui, merci. Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues, je souhaite tout d'abord remercier Madame Estrela de son rapport visant à lutter contre les inégalités en matière d'un environnement sain et sûr. Et Monsieur Bench, tout à l'heure, nous a parlé lors de son rapport sur les politiques de recherche en matière d'environnement. Bien sûr, le remerciement à tous les rapporteurs depuis ce matin, Georges André Ouf, notre collègue Pierre-Alain Frides et puis Monsieur Altunadiz qui tout à l'heure nous a parlé, qui ont contribué significativement à poser les enjeux et à définir un cadre nouveau à l'action du Conseil de l'Europe en matière de protection des personnes, de l'environnement et de transition écologique, et ce, au-delà du seul changement climatique. Je ferai deux propositions concrètes en complément de celles exposées. La première concerne la lutte pour les personnes qui bénéficient des revenus annuels les plus élevés sont celles qui émettent le plus de CO2 par an. Si la redistribution économique est indispensable, elle ne saurait suffire à elle seule à lutter contre les menaces climatiques et environnementales. Et il nous faut donc transformer en profondeur et collectivement les infrastructures dont nous dépendons. Si les États entendent investir dans les infrastructures plus écologiques, il faut aussi faire en sorte que la finance ait aussi la même préoccupation. En l'état, je dirais que les impacts économiques et du réchauffement ne sont pas pris en compte dans les comptabilités d'entreprises ni dans celles des États, et ils sont donc sous-estimés. Seul le risque financier direct et de court terme est pris en compte. Il en résulte que les institutions financières prêtent à des industries fortement carbonées, alors que le discours public, c'est celui d'investir dans la transition écologique. Donc, ce point peut apparaître un peu technique, mais en fait, il est politique et il nous faut donc agir en faveur de cadres financiers, et j'appelle de nouveaux travaux dans notre Assemblée sur ce point. La deuxième proposition concerne la recherche, notamment publique, parce que la recherche et l'innovation sont au cœur des solutions que nous pouvons et devons apporter face au changement climatique et à la nécessaire protection écologique vers laquelle nous souhaitons et nous voulons tendre. Il y a pourtant une crise, la recherche et le développement, et malgré le fait d'être à l'origine de formidables progrès, ne suffit pas à enrayer la dégradation climatique. Il convient donc d'inscrire le principe d'une recherche de progrès environnemental dans nos politiques publiques. Il nous faut donc aussi mettre en place de grands programmes de recherche dédiés en évaluant leurs bénéfices au regard de ceux du développement d'autres technologies plus consommatrices de ressources et porteuses de moins d'avantages socio-économiques. Enfin, un tel choix suppose de s'appuyer sur des connaissances scientifiques, sur la transparence des processus, sur la reconnaissance des incertitudes, et suppose aussi l'établissement de scénarios proposant des options en mettant en évidence ce qui se passe si on fait ou si on n'agit pas. Là encore, donc, le Conseil de l'Europe et notre Assemblée particulièrement peuvent proposer, orienter et construire avec des États et leur société civile des objectifs et des méthodes utiles à tous. Voilà ce que je voulais partager avec vous, mes chers collègues, et je vous remercie de votre attention.
Merci. I call now Ms. Larisa Bilazir from Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Дуже дякую. Dear colleagues, Mr. Mereshko, distinguished reporters, on my behalf, I would like to support and thank you for enormous work. We indeed have a very important historical ecological day here in Pace. I'm sure there will be unanimous support of resolutions this evening, as it was in the first part of the sitting. And the most important decision will be to finally supplement the European Convention on Human Rights with a separate protocol on environmental human rights that can become real instrument to protect environment and take real actions. We all agree that there is no higher value than life and health, because all other rights, political, civil, social, do not matter when the very fact of person's existence, his physical and mental state is threatened. Currently, the right to healthy environment is enshrined in the constitutions of more than 100 countries around the world. Environmental rights include the ability of persons to demand appropriate behavior from state, the fulfillment by governments of duties to protect, preserve, and restore environment. Now, in the context of resolving military conflicts on the European continent and the ruthless use of natural resources, the right to clean air and water has become more relevant for whole Europe. Today, Russian armed aggression against Ukraine is destroying the environment in Ukraine, provoking inequality in the right to safe, healthy and clean environment for millions of residents of the Donbas region and occupied Crimea. Experts of United Nations Environmental Programme said that as a result of occupation of Donbas ecosystem on the territory of at least 500,000 hectares were destroyed, including natural reserves and forests. 5,500 industrial enterprises and infrastructural facilities are concentrated in the region, which in case of damage will become a source of significant harm to the environment. A war zone, including agricultural land, is packed with unexploded ammunition that will take decades to eliminate. A significant problem is the lack of monitoring and access to the region in the so-called gray zone, that is in the temporary occupied territory. Underestimating the new environmental threat that had arisen due to conflicts provoked by the Russian Federation may turn to a general environmental catastrophe in the near future. This situation required indeed a deep rethinking of the importance of environmental law in conflict situations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I call now Mr. Dimitri Houbron from France. He's not here. Since he's not here, we go online, and I call Madame Lucie Moncion from Canada. She will be speaking online. Oh, she's not connected. Okay, we go further. And now I call Ms. Arzu Erdem from Turkey.
Thank you very much, dear President, dear colleagues. I would like to express my gratitude to all three rapporteurs. These reports elaborate on how we could protect the rights of the people in face of climate change, environmental degradation and global warming. Due to the climate change, we are witnessing unusual disasters all around the world, such as floods in Europe, hurricanes in America, fires in the Mediterranean countries. These horrifying disasters around the world are alarmingly warning as they not only damage the environment, but also threaten the lives and rights of people residing in these regions. We know that Europe could not adequately address the migration flows that started due to the political conflict and civil war in Syria. Here I have to underline that Turkey is hosting around 4 million migrants. And now climate change is a far more alarming challenge that is likely to trigger further migration flows. While addressing climate change and ramifications of climate change on the movement of people, we have to prioritize the human rights of those who had to move due to climate-related factors. To reverse the climate change, we need concerted actions based on equity. Paris Climate Agreement was signed and adopted in 2015. We expressed our concerns over the fair share of burden and obligations between those who are largely responsible for the climate change and those which had a little part. Despite the fact that we had reservations and concerns over the Paris Climate Agreement, Paris Agreement will be presented to the Turkish Parliament for ratifications in the new legislative year. This is an indication to our determination in contributing to the concerned efforts and common actions. Turkey will always be the part of collective action for resolving the climate change and addressing its negative impacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I call now Mr. Zoran Tomic from Serbia. He's online. Yeah, is he?
He has to request for the floor. Maybe.
Yes.
He has to request.
He has to request for the floor. If he can hear us right now, please request for the floor. No? Unfortunately, it doesn't work. Then I call Mr. Gusti Gras from Luxembourg.
Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, le cumul de phénomènes météorologiques extrêmes impacte d'ores et déjà le monde entier. Certaines régions sont pourtant touchées sensiblement plus que d'autres. Même si les pays développés de l'Ouest ne sont pas à l'abri de catastrophes naturelles, les conséquences pour les pays en voie de développement sont bien plus dévastatrices. Ce sont souvent les populations les plus vulnérables, les populations qui se trouvent déjà dans une situation précaire, qui sont frappées le plus fort par les crises. On l'a constaté dans le cadre de la pandémie du Covid-19 et nous le voyons également avec la crise climatique. La deuxième partie du rapport Groundswell de la Banque mondiale, présenté il y a quelques semaines, souligne clairement la dimension des enjeux. Dans beaucoup de pays, le dérèglement climatique est associé à des sécheresses de plus en plus sévères, des pertes de récoltes dans l'agriculture importante, des pénuries en eau potable, la montée du niveau en mer, bref, une destruction progressive des fondements de toute vie. En absence d'une politique climatique efficace au niveau mondial, les pressions environnementales y liées pourraient engendrer des flux migratoires majeurs. Pas moins de 216 millions de personnes pourraient être forcées à quitter leur terre natale jusqu'en 2050. Tout comme la lutte contre le changement climatique est une responsabilité de la communauté internationale, les efforts afin de mitiger les répercussions de celui-ci sont également. Ceci d'autant plus que souvent les populations qui souffrent le plus du dérèglement climatique n'y peuvent le moins. Pour éviter le pire, les États membres du Conseil d'Europe doivent prendre toutes les mesures nécessaires pour atteindre des objectifs climatiques ambitieux et respecter l'accord de Paris. Or, comme je viens de le dire, les conséquences du changement climatique se font ressentir déjà aujourd'hui très clairement. Il est donc impératif que les politiques de coopération prennent davantage en considération la prévention et l'adaptation au changement climatique. Nous devons surtout garantir que les personnes forcées à se déplacer à cause d'un effondrement de leur base de vie puissent construire une autre existence en dignité et dans le respect des droits humains ailleurs. Sachant que la majorité des flux migratoires se fait ou à l'intérieur des pays concernés ou vers les pays limitrophes, ce sont ces pays-là que nous devons soutenir à accueillir les réfugiés climatiques et à leur offrir les opportunités par une nouvelle vie nécessaire. Cette idée n'est point nouvelle. La conférence de Copenhague a déjà identifié en 2009 le besoin d'appuyer les pays en voie de développement dans la lutte contre le changement climatique. Pourtant, depuis lors, la situation est devenue beaucoup plus urgente, de façon que nous sommes appelés à intensifier nos efforts. Pour le Luxembourg, mon pays natal, le renforcement de la résilience des populations est l'un des axes de sa stratégie climatique. Ainsi, le gouvernement luxembourgeois s'est engagé à prévoir une somme de 200 millions d'euros pour la période de 2021 jusqu'à 2025. Finalement, je tiens à remercier tous les rapporteurs pour leur excellent rapport. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. And now I call Mr. Gagan Mahindra from the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, seems like he's not here. Then our next speaker, Mr. Yuri Kamilchuk from Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues. In the temporarily occupied territory of the Donbas in Ukraine, there are many heavy industry enterprises, especially coal mines, which don't work and have not been brought under adequate environmental supervision. And as a result, the groundwater table is changing. There is a risk that whole cities could be buried at the same time, and land and air are being polluted by heavy metals, particularly radioactive ones. Due to shelling from the occupying Russian forces, water and electricity suppliers are regularly interrupted, posing a serious threat to the safety of the environment. We call on the General Secretary of the UN and the member states of the Council of Europe to pay attention to this issue and wield their political power over the Russian Federation and occupying state to urgently solve the environmental problems in the Donbas, and ultimately to force Russia to pursue a peaceful solution to the conflict. Another point that Ukraine is seriously interested in working with hydrogen and has great potential to do so. We want to make Ukraine a hydrogen hub within Europe, and a possible hydrogen revolution could radically reduce carbon emissions and help us achieve true carbon neutrality. Due to the scandal which has arisen around the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and speculation in the global gas market inspired by Russia, gas prices have risen spectacularly. European citizens, dependent as they are on a Russian gas supply, will soon see their utility bills rise yet again, and consequently the social inequality mentioned in the report on combating inequality will only continue to deepen. How should the Council of Europe and international society address the rise of cryptocurrencies and subsequently the growth of the use of electricity? We see how some crypto farms use more electricity than many countries. Is it fertile ground for environmental inequalities? It is still unclear and uneven how the state should correlate business interest and freedom with environmental challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call now Madame Martine Legui-Bellois from France. Oh, she's not here. Yeah, yes. Okay, dear colleagues, that concludes the list of speakers. However, we have time to take more speakers. Does anybody in the chamber or remotely connected wish to request the floor? No one. No one. Okay. We will now have the replies to the joint debate. I call Ms. Estrela, rapporteur for the first report, to reply. You have 3 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Tout d'abord, je tiens à remercier les intervenants pour leur soutien et leurs commentaires. Notamment mon collègue, mon camarade Jérémy Corbyn. Oui, je suis d'accord que l'investissement public est nécessaire pour aider les plus défavorisés. Et à Madame Olena Komenko, je suis d'accord et vous avez mentionné deux points de mon rapport très importants et que c'est le point 12.3 et le point de la résolution et le point 13.2. Oui, ce sont des points très importants et que j'espère que soient approuvés. Les collègues Liliana Tanguy et Marietta Caramelli ont fait aussi des propositions et qui sont très intéressantes, mais ce n'est pas, je crois, le moment pour les débattre. Quelques derniers commentaires. Des inégalités qui auraient été décrites il y a encore une trentaine d'années comme des inégalités sociales présentent aujourd'hui une forte connotation environnementale. Les inégalités dans l'exposition aux pollutions et dans l'accès aux aménités, les inégalités distributives des politiques environnementales, les inégalités face aux impacts environnementaux et les inégalités dans la participation aux politiques publiques. L'influence de la qualité de l'environnement physique, chimique, biologique sur la santé s'impose de plus en plus. L'air que nous respirons, la qualité de l'eau, le bruit influent de façon plus ou moins directe sur notre état de santé. Encore une fois, je remercie les rapporteurs qui ont débattu de ce matin et les collègues Pierre-Alain et Olivier. Ensemble, nous avons décidé d'accorder l'importance que mérite la menace climatique pour notre intérêt et celui de nos enfants. Je vous remercie pour votre attention et nous souhaite le meilleur, une fois, de retour dans nos parlements respectifs. Ensemble, nous pourrons apporter les réponses nécessaires contre la crise climatique. Pour conclure, je tiens à remercier le soutien de la présidente de la Commission pour l'égalité et non-discrimination, Petra Bayer, et le secrétariat, et aussi les collègues qui ont approuvé mon rapport à l'unanimité à la Commission de l'égalité. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Does the chairperson of the committee, Madame Petra Bayer, wish to speak?
Yes, of course.
Please.
I want to applaud Edith Estrella for her far-sightedness, for her vision, her and also the Committee of Ministers, to have the idea to transform the human rights to a healthy environment into international hard law. And I assume that some decades ago in this assembly, in this hemicycle, there was somebody who wrote a report about the violence against women. And maybe she had the vision that in some decades that can become a convention, an international convention to combat violence against women. And I want to draw some parallels because I think to fight femicides, to prevent violence against women, there are some parallels to the fight against ecocides. The violence against the environment is as important, as timely as to fight against violence. And as I know that Edith comes from Lisbon, I have also a vision. I have the vision that maybe in a decade we are standing here and debating about how can we find more countries ratifying the Lisbon Convention on a human right to a healthy environment. And I really want to congratulate all the rapporteurs of today's reports. I think we really make a tremendous important step into the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I call Mr. Frides, the rapporteur for the second report, to reply. You have 3 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice-président. Mesdames, Messieurs, un grand merci à tous les intervenants. Félicitations à mes collègues pour leur rapport tout à fait pertinent. Et je vais me permettre de répondre à quelques éléments qui ont été en fait présentés dans le débat. Tout d'abord, j'aimerais saluer les propositions de M. Rousopoulos de Grèce, qui effectivement insistait sur le respect des droits humains. C'est fondamental dans cette problématique de migration climatique, comme dans beaucoup d'autres. Également, la volonté de lutter contre le système des passeurs. C'est pour ça qu'il faut sécuriser les voies d'arrivée vers l'Europe. J'aimerais saluer aussi les propos de Mme Mezenceva, qui parle d'un fonds climatique en Ukraine. C'est vraiment aller dans la bonne direction. Planter des arbres, c'est vraiment toujours très intéressant. Il faudra en planter beaucoup plus dans le Sahel. Donc là aussi, je salue tout à fait cette proposition. Madame Yassar nous parle d'un problème qui est récurrent dans la Commission, c'est le fait que l'effort à l'égard des migrations n'est pas partagé. Il y a des pays en première ligne, dont la Turquie, mais il y en a d'autres, qui font l'essentiel de l'effort. Et c'est vraiment important que l'ensemble de l'Europe s'organise pour que cet effort soit partagé, parce que ce que fait la Turquie, la Grèce, l'Italie, Malte, l'Espagne est sans commune mesure avec ce que font d'autres pays. Ensuite, 3 parlementaires ont fait un peu la même remarque. Madame Filipovski de Serbie, Monsieur Cengiz Zalan de Hongrie et Monsieur Gustigras du Luxembourg, qui parlaient de ce dont j'ai parlé dans le rapport, à savoir l'importance de créer les conditions d'une résilience sur place, donc de créer sur place des moyens permettant aux gens de supporter les conséquences néfastes du réchauffement climatique afin de leur permettre de rester sur leur terre originelle, d'y vivre le mieux possible. J'abonde tout à fait dans ces propositions, mais je n'aimerais pas qu'on fasse ces propositions et que quelque part elles soient en opposition avec le fait qu'une partie des gens devront migrer. Et c'est vrai que les ports de l'Europe devront s'ouvrir pour une partie de ces populations qui n'arriveront pas à obtenir cette résilience face à l'importance des problèmes. Et encore une fois, je pense que la barque n'est pas pleine en Europe. On peut accepter des migrants, on devra le faire, déjà pour des raisons démographiques et aussi simplement par pure humanité. Voilà, j'aimerais vraiment remercier tous les intervenants et puis, effectivement, aujourd'hui, je trouve qu'on traite un problème fondamental pour l'avenir de nos pays, pour l'avenir de la planète, pour l'avenir de notre jeunesse. Et comme je suis grand-père, j'aimerais bien que ça marche. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Please.
J'aimerais juste préciser encore que comme je suis président de la commission, il n'y aura pas d'autres interventions pour les migrations.
Merci beaucoup. And now I call Mr. Becht, who is connecting remotely, the rapporteur for the third report, to reply. You have 3 minutes. Mr. Becht, please.
Oui, bonjour Monsieur le Président. Vous m'entendez? Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Bien. Merci beaucoup. D'abord, je voudrais remercier l'ensemble des collègues pour leurs interventions. Je suis moi-même papa d'un petit garçon de 9 ans et nous sommes tous attachés à laisser à nos enfants une planète qui sera encore vivable. Nous devons donc aujourd'hui ne plus simplement faire de grandes déclarations, faire du droit, nous devons agir. Je pense que le Conseil de l'Europe peut le faire. Il a toute sa place avec l'ensemble des 47 pays membres pour essayer dans le domaine de la recherche sur les énergies du futur ou dans le domaine des énergies renouvelables, faire ce que nous avons fait avec d'autres accords partiels. Je pense notamment à Eurimage ou encore avec la pharmacopée, c'est-à-dire des coopérations concrètes. Dans le domaine des matières premières, nous avons un certain nombre d'enjeux. On ne pourra pas faire d'énergie renouvelable si nous ne pouvons pas la stocker dans des batteries. Pour ça, il faut des matières premières, le cobalt, le nickel, les terres rares, le lithium, qui vont devenir le pétrole de demain ou le gaz de demain. Et donc, ce que je vous propose aujourd'hui, c'est de pouvoir envisager demain un accord partiel avec une banque des matières premières qui permettra à l'Europe d'assurer sa souveraineté en matière d'énergie renouvelable et donc d'aller de manière confiante vers l'utilisation de ces énergies renouvelables qui nous permettront de respecter les accords de Paris. Voilà. Je vous remercie encore une fois pour votre attention. Je vous remercie pour la confiance de la Commission qui a adopté ce rapport à l'unanimité. Je pense qu'il est temps maintenant pour l'ensemble de nos pays, mais aussi pour notre organisation, d'agir de manière...
Merci. Does Mr. Rampi, the Vice Chairperson of the committee, wish to speak? Please.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. And Io credo che, parafrasando un autore famoso, potremmo dire che finora i politici hanno parlato dei cambiamenti climatici, ora si tratta di fare qualche cosa per risolverli. E in questo senso va il lavoro del nostro collega Beck e della nostra Commissione. Abbiamo provato ad individuare alcuni elementi fondamentali. Uno è quello di investire molto di più nella ricerca delle nuove fonti energetiche, perché se vogliamo davvero transire verso un'altra forma di approvvigionamento energetico dobbiamo fare di più e non possiamo utilizzare solo le energie alternative che abbiamo utilizzato fino adesso, che non sono abbastanza efficienti. E in secondo luogo dobbiamo decidere e lavorare per l'approvvigionamento di queste risorse energetiche per i materiali che sono fondamentali. E io credo che sia molto interessante, molto affascinante pensare che questa Assemblea parlamentare, questi 47 paesi, ma anche gli altri paesi che si avvicinano a noi, possano provare a lavorare insieme sulle nuove fonti energetiche, può prefigurare un giorno, un domani, una nuova forma di organizzazione politica che nasca proprio da questa organizzazione. E credo che questo tocchi il presente e il futuro di questa organizzazione. Qualcuno ogni tanto dice che noi siamo meno importanti dell'Unione Europea, che questo luogo è meno importante perché è meno sotto l'attenzione dei riflettori. Io credo che non sia così. Io credo che per il tipo di paesi che partecipano a questa Assemblea parlamentare 4 volte all'anno, noi in questo momento possiamo essere il luogo più importante del pianeta. E è importante in una giornata come questa, completamente dedicata ai temi ambientali. Vedete, in queste ore nella mia Milano, pochi minuti da dove abito, ci sono i ragazzi della COP Giovani, c'è Greta Thunberg, inizierà la pre-COP, faremo un lavoro insieme con gli inglesi. Ecco, da quelle voci ci vengono delle richieste esigenti e noi dobbiamo decidere se questo è il luogo dove ci si bacchetta a vicenda su chi si è comportato bene e chi si è comportato male, come abbiamo sentito anche in una parte di questo dibattito, oppure se questo è il luogo dove insieme noi facciamo evolvere i diritti e noi proviamo ad acquisirne di nuovi. E oggi questa giornata così opportunamente costruita è una giornata in cui individuiamo insieme dei nuovi diritti, un diritto a un ambiente, un diritto all'ecologia, alla logica ecologica, e proviamo a costruire insieme questo diritto in maniera esigibile, dandoci gli strumenti per ottenerlo, per raggiungerlo e per garantirlo. Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you. So, dear colleagues, the debate is closed, and we are moving to adoption of the resolution. The Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination has presented a draft resolution, document 1534-9, to which no amendments have been tabled. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 1534-9. A simple majority is required. Members present in the chamber should use the hemicycle voting system. Members participating remotely should vote using the remote voting system. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 1534-9 is adopted. We move on. The Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons has presented a draft resolution, document 1534-8, to which no amendments have been tabled. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 1534-8. A simple majority is required. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Unanimously, congratulations. The draft resolution in document 1534-8 is adopted. We continue. The Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media has presented a draft resolution and a draft recommendation, document 1535-7, to which no amendments have been tabled. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 1535-7. A simple majority is required. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Okay. The draft resolution in document 1535-7 is adopted. We will now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation contained in document 1535-7, to which no amendments have been tabled. A 2/3 majority is required. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft recommendation in document 1535-7 is adopted.
There's a request to speak from Ms. Eccles.
Yes, there is a request to speak. Yes, please. Yes. Yes, please.
About that exhibition room.
I never asked to speak.
I just hope they do. And they want £850 a day.
Yeah. Yeah, if it is a point of order, you can speak, please. Oh, well, unfortunately, yes, yes. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with the agenda which was approved on Monday morning. The sitting is adjourned. Thank you.